Great. So this is our third session on contributions to philosophy of the event by Heidegger. This part we're reading part two, so it's a little bit funny that this is third session, but part two. It's because we spent two on part one. But this is going to be part two, the resonating, just chapter two of the whole book, about 45 pages, and we'll do our usual round robin of first impressions, so forth, in just a second. For next time, the plan is to do just all of part three, which is the interplay. It's again about 45 pages, so about the same pace as this time. People can give me comments if they think that that's too fast or too slow. But the plan is the next 45 pages or so in 4 weeks. So that would have us doing the next section on Sunday, the 17th of March at the same time. Anyone have a problem with 17th of March? All right, then without objection, so ordered, so to speak. So that's the plan for next time. Just a little bit of background, where we are, where we're going. So first we got through the whole introduction section. That was sort of more overarching. It laid out this whole structure with all these pieces in it, and now he's going through individual pieces of that structure, the first of which is this resonating notion. And the next one is going to be the interplay. There's others beyond that, like, leap and grounding and so forth. But for next time, interplay is all about the history of the first beginning, the history of metaphysics, and the relation of that to the other beginning, something like that. But there's going to be a lot of stuff in that that's about Plato to Nietzsche, history of metaphysics, what the tissue of metaphysics has in common. There's a fair amount of overlap of that with some of the material in the Nietzsche lectures on history of metaphysics, I think in volume 3 of the Nietzsche lectures, etc. That's just a foreshadowing. But that's sort of where we're going to next, is stuff all about the first beginning. This time, the resonating, it's all about where we are. It's all about what Nietzsche would call nihilism or modernity, or a predicament or plight that we're in now, and his reading on that. So in the overall structure, there's the idea of a new beginning is starting from something about the current situation, the situation that is part of the same formation as the original beginning of philosophy, part of the original formation of metaphysics, something like that, that leads us to the current situation as something like a Nietzschean nihilism, something like a Weberian disenchanted world, other things you might want to call it, but he's calling it the resonating, and that's his term for it. And we'll have to talk about why he would call this the resonating. But there's various formulas for it in this section. Overall, the abandonment of beings by being is sort of the formula of this, and this is sort of meant to be his replacement or deepening of, or more thorough understanding of what Nietzsche called nihilism, something like that. Anyway, that's just background on where we are, what the section is, and get people's first impressions on the reading. Pete.
Yeah, so I read it a few weeks ago. Been going back to it. So part two seems to be broadly divided into two parts. One's concentrates on machination and lived experience, which I'd completely forgotten about from having read the Annoning version of this book decades ago. And so I went back because I remembered the lived experience was something that was part of the early Heidegger before being in time, when he's doing phenomenology and reading Husserl. And yeah, back then, lived experience is something he contrasts with the scientific understanding of the world. And we actually, wake up in our inauthentic, ready to hand mode and go about our day having lived experiences. And only when things shift into present at hand, and that's already being in time terminology, do we then look at the scientific properties of something. But now lived experience is something bad, and he's I think now it means kind of like subjective. And so there's the objective scientific, and there's the objective about feelings and experiences and stuff. And they're both bad. To be caught up in the objective world or to be caught up in the subjective world, they both seem to uh, be bad now. And we should wait for the next beginning, I guess, instead. And so then the other half is the science thing, and I remembered that from having read it before, and that was kind of one of the clearest parts of the previous translation. And what struck me this time is it's like he's having his Wittgenstein Tractatus moment, and he's going to do propositions and number them. And that's kind of rare for Heidegger. But he's, looking at science, which is about the being of beings. And in a sense, that's what Wittgenstein was also examining in the track. And you're going to go through it systematically and say, well, what can you say by experiment, via theory, etc. And then, Heidegger then expands it to the social sciences and the other Wissenschafts, and ranks them through his propositions. So there's that, and I guess the other things that struck me, I'll bring up if they come up while we're discussing it.
Okay, so fair. There's definitely a section at the end of our reading about where he's focused on the science stuff. I think it's much less than half. It's like a last bit, but and the machination and lived experience is kind of the middle. It's not the first part, but you're right that lived experience has taken on a very different meaning here than it might have had earlier, and I think we have to talk about why that is. But at a first pass, lived experience is what being in time got pigeonholed as by everybody else who read it who didn't become convinced by it, right? So they were willing to acknowledge it as having made contributions to human anthropology by explaining the lived experience side of things, which is different from the science side of things, so that we have this the complement of positivist science and psychology of lived experience thought of as merely subjective, but things which you can say things about. And these two between them as meaning to exhaust what there is of knowledge or wisdom, something like that. And from Heidegger's point of view, this is a pigeonholing of being in time that's taming it, that's preventing it from disrupting anything about how being appears to the modern world, something like that. So we'll have to talk through why, what he means by lived experience here, and how it's a kind of there's a definite flip of focus on lived experience as something which is forgotten by previous philosophy into now lived experience is a formula for the superficial treatment of what he wishes was treated, taken more seriously, something like that, and that he sees that as going along with the machination stuff that he thinks he's reacting to. But so definitely need to flag we have to talk about how lived experience changed its meanings, so to speak. But fine topics. Dan? Oh, so by the way, a few other people came in, so just explaining the format for everybody who might be new. We're doing a round robin of first impressions, and this is, did you manage to do the reading? Had you read it before? What are your first impressions, kind of stuff? And the idea is to raise any subject matter that we might want to make sure we talk about when we get to the reading itself. And if you don't know, we're reading the second part of this book as a reading for this time. Anyway, Dan, first impressions.
Yeah, so hi, so resonating, so to me it's like, so it's kind of like almost a musical term, or a musical, like being is doing something. Are we in tune with that? And that's kind of like the entire topic of this, and the term and the topic. So, and then And of course, Heidegger says we are not. And then why? Because as you said, that there is the forgottenness of the being. And then he came up with this, what are the other, like, for example, he said that we're abandoned by being. And then how do we respond to this, all this abandonment? And then we will respond by machinations. And then we think, well, if we somehow oppose machinations with lived experience, we get it right. But he pretty much, he says those two things are in the same boat. They complement each other. And then there is, of course, for him, both machination and lived experience goes back to this, to anthropology and to placing the human at the center, and he's against that. And then he mentioned that the gigantic, to him, that's another form of this abandonment, and we kind of covering that completely. And then it's interesting, like it says Nietzsche sensed something, and he sensed something with his nihilism. It was not exactly what Heidegger is going through, but he says it was close enough, and that's why kind of he's going back to Nietzsche a lot and to this nihilism, and he will do that later. So it's kind of this nihilism is kind of it is a resonating. Nietzsche was in tune with that, not fully, but partially, and he got something, and what he got, and so on. And then of course we think these days that we have science, that's our response to being and so on, and he's kind to take that down there at the end. And especially I like someone who's involved in science, and especially in experiment, I absolutely love the last part, the science, and especially the experiment. And I think one confusion to me is like, it seems like here he's talking about machination, and also he's here and there talking about technology, but later he's pretty much dropping machination completely, and he just talks about technology. So I'm not sure if it's how these two concepts are different or are the same thing. It's just him trying to clarify things, and later he just settled for technology as the more fundamental concept. But that's it for me.
Yeah, these are good topics. We definitely want to talk about why he calls it the resonating. I agree, it's a musical term. It's something that's ringing, and we have to figure out what the ringing is and why he's calling it resonating. There is a section just titled Nihilism that's all about the Nietzsche and the claim that, Nietzsche was not understood, basically, and he's even asking the question, how is anybody going to get the stuff I'm saying about the other beginning if they didn't even get the stuff that Nietzsche said about nihilism, right? So there's an underlying exasperation about not being heard here that he's commiserating with Nietzsche about, so to speak. So we definitely want to talk about the resonating. We definitely want to talk about the nihilism stuff. In the science section, I mean, there's multiple things going on there. Is some of the stuff that's more about the hard and experimental sciences and their mathematical nature, where he's partly disagreeing with people in his time that have shallower views on it, if I can put it that way. But some of his thoughts here on, modern science method, et cetera, are honestly not that sophisticated as, philosophy of science things go, right? You can get in some ways more in Bacon or more in Popper on some of these questions, but his own takes on it are distinctive in trying to tie it to these metaphysics questions. And the two places where I think he's most on point in those sections are the places where he's talking about sort of the modern institutionalized side of science, put it that way, the way in which science is becoming a business, and how that plugs into things. And then also the stuff that he says there about the social sciences, the humanities, but especially and history, historiography, his critique of historiography as the avoidance of history, and that's very important to track through, because it's fair to say that the focus on the other beginning is meant to be a different relationship to something like time and history than we had in the metaphysical era, so to speak. And so that means that historiography is something which is going to change a lot here. Both Nietzsche and Heidegger had the reputation of being historicist thinkers in a way. And this whole idea that the major change that's going on is from the whole historical formation since the Greeks, that's called metaphysics, being changed into another beginning, is thinking on this sort of grand historical narrative sweep level that philosophies of history themselves are also cast at. But he is sharply distinguishing that here from historiography as academically practiced. So his critique of historiography in the social sciences is part of the science thing here where I think he's on firmer ground, so to speak. Definitely want to talk about resonating when we get to it. Definitely have thoughts on that. On the machination point, I agree that this is machination, not technology, and we want to talk about what he means by it. He gives some passages here where he tries to explain exactly what he means by it. The critical thing to hear in the word in German is the Mach in machination is power. It's the same Mach in Wildermacht. It's the Nietzsche's philosophy as the power, will to power philosophy is about that same Mach as machination. Machination also has the idea though of making. It's the understand everything as made. And he says at one point that machination is the view of everything as produced or created. So that the producer rules the produced for the sake of the producer's ends, something like that, is part of the idea of machination, with the accent on the power and Mach side of it. And this is related to thinking of beings as having natures in the sense of what they can do. They're what you can do with them. It's a functional view of what counts as being, but also from the standpoint of causal origination as something like ruling, right? So you get a power originating, ruling, producing. The producer's view of what is. What is what is produced. What is produced is what producers wanted to produce for the producer's ends. But from Heidegger's point of view, we should therefore not be too surprised if we look around and find that we are surrounded by factory products, because we have a metaphysics that says that what is a product. But anyway, there's a running into that we can. There's a theme running through all that we can get here. But if there's an accent that's different in machination versus technology, it's on this producing and power aspect, rather than the technical know-how accent in technology. But anyway, good subject to raise. We'll try to get to the actual conversation. First impressions, Joe.
My first impression is a little more agnostic. I find the material very difficult to read at length. I try to read one numbered section at a time, but his language or what he's talking about almost feels to me like reading some obscure religious text. And it frustrates me a little bit. So I'm very eager to listen to the discussion here because it will be made much clearer, I'm sure. But the point remains that I'm interested to know what he's getting at. And I'm not there yet. And it's going slowly for me. So I'm not going to say much more. I'm just listening. And I must say I'm frustrated a little bit.
Yep.
So I'm hoping that we have clarification. I intend to keep on, of course, plowing away at it. But I'm only about halfway through the current today's assigned section. And I'll just keep on pushing along. I was puzzled a while as why he calls it a plight, but now I know I'm plighting it myself.
Yeah, so I mean the plight is there's some conundrum we're in, and he has this elaborate formulation that the highest form of plight is the plight of the lack of sense of plight. In other words, when you're in a terrible fix and in terrible danger and you don't know it, right? That's what makes it worse, right? The not knowing that you're in the terrible fix makes the terrible fix you're in worse, because you're not even beginning to think about getting out of it. But that's the plight of the lack of sense of plight aspect. I think you're not wrong to see some of this as having an obscure language that reminds you of an obscure religious text or obscure religious sect. There are elements of that here. When he's talking about the resonating, he is talking about something like listening for a hidden ringing. If I were to try to translate it into something might be congenial terms for you, he is noticing the fact that neither gods nor being are speaking to man, in modern man. Modern man and being are not on speaking terms. And that's the word for that is the refusal. The refusal is partly man refusing to listen and partly being refusing to speak. And he puts the accent on both those at different times in a way that you might find obscure and religious. But one way to think about it is this. We talked last time about the idea of a disenchanted world. If you imagine a world in which there are naturally existing prophets running around who are normally receiving revelation from on high, and all their revelation has ceased, they would say, the gods have stopped talking to us, right? Philosophers can do the same thing when essential insights into metaphysical truth have also disappeared, right? So, and that will sound like the truth we were listening to before has stopped talking, has disappeared, has gone quiet. Okay. The next thing is if you were listening to a constant flow of communication from on high before, and it suddenly ceases, you will notice static. You will hear the absence of the messages from on high. You will miss the messages from on high like you would miss a missing limb if you had just had a leg amputated, right? So Heidegger's meaning muscles are listening for the voice of being, and the voice of being is not talking. So what he hears is a tinnitus of a missing meaning bone in his ear that isn't hearing anything. And this is the ringing of resonating, right? It's his ears ringing from the silence of being has stopped talking. And yes, you can think of that as a kind of religious metaphor. It's the gods have absconded. Truth has shut up. Revelation has ceased. The philosophers are completely devoid of essential insight, and they're passing around old, worn-out thoughts from a few centuries ago, like used coins, but they're not discovering anything because they're not hearing anything. They're not hearing anything because the things that they would be listening for before aren't talking to them. They also maybe distract themselves and not looking in the right place and not listening, whatever. But the end result is you get a whole bunch of not listening, along with the plight of the lack of sense of plight. The people who are not listening, some of them can't even hear the silence, so to speak. They cannot hear the deafening silence of on high no longer speaking to man. And instead, they're distracting themselves with affairs of the day, and they're not noticing that they have been abandoned. So yes, there's a kind of religious metaphor language in that. It's like saying, the phrase, a God-forsaken place, right? So modern Europe to Heidegger is a truth-forsaken place, right? Something like that. So you can think of that as the way in which someone reacts to what he regards as a philosophical error or the reign of a philosophical error, the reign of philosophical ideologies whose errors he can see, but the people wrapped up in them don't see or can't see. And so there you can see that they're trapped in this little circle or bubble of their ideology that they can't get out of. You can see that it's not the truth. You can try to communicate that to them, but they don't see that they're missing anything, right? So they lack the sense of plight to recognize that they're caught, right? So that's the overall impression that he's getting at here. And yes, the language being used for that gets mystical and religious, and it gets like inside revelation-y, so to speak. I can hear this, they can't. And he's not writing this to convince them. He's writing this as his own reflections on what he thinks is going on. So as he's thinking it through for himself. So he's not trying to convince someone else that this is the case. This is the case to him. This is how it looks to him. And he's in a frustrated fashion trying to think about, what do I do with these trapped blockheads, right? Does that help?
Yes. My impression was that this is really his meditations in almost a closed way. He wasn't intending this stuff to be published like a book, so he wasn't trying to be didactic at all. And that's my problem, that he wasn't adequately, I guess, putting me in the picture. I was just peeking in the window, as it were.
Yeah,
So
I think I think that that's fair for the actual direct formulations of these. These were like not meant to be finished, polished things written, but he was trying to build a structure that he imagined could be, a work, a contributions to philosophy work. This is a little bit like the model of Nietzsche's will to power idea, that he was going to write a particular book of that name that never actually got written, but he was, producing materials for over a number of years and coming up with different plans for and rearranging and so forth. This is a bit like that, and that this was meant to eventually be part of some whole structure work that he did hope at some point to finish and publish, but it's not in published form, and it's not
Yeah.
as published.
I did think about it much as we had already discussed Nietzsche writing all his fragments. And I thought to myself, well, these are really fragments. I don't know how sequential they were when they were composed, but now we can follow them in some sequential numbered process at least.
Yeah, I think that we can tell because of the structure they fit into that some of these were thought of in something like this order. Maybe some of the things in the overview that we got in part one were afterwards and looking back at the whole thing. But he is trying to elaborate a whole bridge here, so to speak. And so the different girders of the bridge, et cetera, do have their own. There's some structure here. It's not stream of consciousness, but good questions, and we'll try to address some of the concerns. It's not out of place to find this challenging. He's talking in an almost private language. Isabel, first impressions.
Yes. Good afternoon, everybody. And I did the reading. I enjoyed the book tremendously. I finished the reading and went ahead and read a good part of the next, the interplay. And there are some parts that are obscure, like what Dan was saying about the experiment of science. To me, that was obscure. But the other part, I don't find, I didn't find that obscure. I wanted, as two little points I put in my notebook. I wanted to take you to task when Jason, when you asked that you said, well, I think he's re-enchanting. Do you think he's re-enchanting? He's trying to re-enchant the world again? And this is I was going to say. Well, first of all, it implies that he has an agenda, and Jason, I don't think he does. And when you say, and secondly, it says a re-enchant. That means that you think that the world has been enchanted before. And I said, what is Jason trying to do here? And then I went into Heidegger, and he talks about bewitchery.
Mhm.
Now I'm saying, is that what he's talking about? But bewitchery is a terrible, terrible thing, whereby it directs everything toward calculation, utility, breeding, manageability, and regulation on page 98. Is that what Jesus is talking about? Bewitchery, re-enchantment? But because I'm listening now to how you are now formulating re-enchantment, I understand. So still,
So
I wonder about this agenda thing.
So he
And
definitely. I'm sorry. I'll let you finish.
I just want to say, this book has to be taken and accepted in the same way, in the same authoritative manifestation as we take being and time. And if we don't, then we are enchanted, because we should. That's my saying.
Okay, so fine. I, as a philosophically inclined reader, I don't take being time as an authority. I take it as an argument, and I pay attention to its argument and evidence, and I try to do the same here. Now, this is because it's much more private, internal. It's not trying to convince me. It's trying to sort of lay out its evidence. I have to follow him on the structure he's laying out, and I don't read it quite as critically because I first need to see where he's going. But it's not authority. Let's put it that way. But does he have an agenda? I think he does have an agenda. I think he's very clear about his agenda. His agenda is another beginning. He wants to refound Western philosophy and revitalize it. He thinks that there's some things about Western philosophy that have been in decline since Plato, he says multiple times in our reading. And he has a definite agenda to revitalize that. So as for the bewitchery and enchantment, bewitchery is definitely his term there that he's using, as he's claiming that machination is the real bewitchery, but he's doing this as a conscious reversal. He knows that people around him, like Weber, are talking about the disenchantment of the world, etc. And he's saying, oh, the real bewitchery, which is a kind of evil spell cast over people, is Cartesian rationalism and positivism and machination, or something like that. That's the thing folks are trapped inside, but that is a deliberate, conscious rhetorical reversal on his part, right? He's saying that the people who pride themselves in being unbewitched and being completely rational in a completely rational world are the ones who are bewitched with a different spell they can't see, something like that. But at the very first section of this, and also in the intro parts of the actual chapter on bewitchery you cite, he is acknowledging this the previous claim, the more common claim, the sort of floating around in the atmosphere claim, that something like modern scientific worldview, modern positivism, modernity, whatever, has disenchanted the world, and that disenchantment of the world here is, in his own language, is beings being abandoned by being. That's the actual disenchantment from his point of view. And I call that a disenchantment because it is a meaning appearing on the surface of things to man that is not there anymore, right? We can talk about how the machination and lived experience, structure of those two things together does that, and how that's part and parcel of sort of like Cartesian philosophy or something like that. But I don't think there's any question that Heidegger thinks that there is something which is there is a missing communication of meaning in a world dominated by not just science, but by the belief of modern science as the only form of knowing, something like that, which you might call positivism, that has split what can be known into machinations on the one hand and a purely subjective lived experience on the other, and that has drained the world of a kind of meaning that it not only has had before, but still has for Heidegger and should have again, something like that. When he talks about the sense of being he sees from the people around him, he says that I can't even recognize it, right? He has a standard from his own experience of what counts as meaning of being, and he can't even recognize this in what the modern philosophers around him are saying about being. We can get to that when we get deeper into it, but that's the enchantment, disenchantment thing that I'm speaking about. And you can call it meaning, world with meaning versus world without meaning. That's the Nietzsche formulation of it. Nihilism is a world without meaning or world without goals, right? Those are different formulations of the same situation, the situation that he's trying to name with the resonating, he's trying to name as, beings being abandoned by being. But all these attempts to name it are trying to get at where its real origin is, where its real root is, not just like its symptoms. Although there are other chapters here that are all about, laying out the symptoms. But fine question, and we should definitely pay attention to the
just
enchantment and bewitchery. Go ahead.
Yeah, one technical point. You know, Jason, that I read the same sentence about 10 times just to try to understand. And for those of you who are technical minded, in my past life, I was a proofreader, and when my eyes don't fail me. And there is a typo, big one, page 87, second paragraph. Let's see if anybody finds it. Don't look for it now. It's not that easy to find. But I'll just, maybe if you have nothing to do one day. Not everybody's looking.
Yes, now everyone is looking. I did notice some typos going through, but I'll have to go back and see if I found the same one as yours. But okay, but thank you. Okay, so let's see. Jim, your first impressions.
Well, I'll get the video on. Yeah, there's so much in there. It would be 3 weeks. There's so many thoughts within thoughts, and especially when he gets into sort of a denigration of science, which sort of surprised me. Not so much that he had what he had to say, but the strong rhetoric. I usually don't read Heidegger with that. He's really passionate. It's almost like a little bit of a Nietzsche thing. It was incredible. For Joe, by the way, Joe, I put in the chat like a little section from American Pie that I think that what you were asking about what Heidegger's saying is kind of what Don McLean says in that song, you know. Went down to the sacred store and the music they wouldn't play anymore. And in the streets, the children screamed, the lovers cried, and the poets dreams. Not a word was spoken, the church bells all were broken, like the silence. So anyway, I was trying to make a joke, sort of a trope there. But that's sort of what Heidegger was saying then. I've wondered a lot about, and I don't remember, does this precede his commentaries on Nietzsche's will to power? I think it does.
I mean, contemporary, some of his Nietzsche lectures are happening after this, but they're, yeah, it's around the same time.
Yeah.
But
there was a lot of that in there.
Sorry, the first couple of books of the Nietzsche lectures are from before this, but it spans it.
Okay.
You have a comment on that for the timing?
I was just wondering
Sorry, Jim, just for a second.
Oh.
Pete, do you want to jump in there on anything about that timing?
No, I think this is 36, and I think the will to power lectures are 36, and then eternal recurrence the next semester.
Yeah.
So they're both, I think they're contemporary.
Okay.
Yeah. I think the last of this was 38, though, we think, but so yes, but they're happening right around the same time. It's very sorry, go ahead.
No, yeah, it reminded me a lot of that, almost like he was, and to me, a surprisingly clear way, writing down his ideas and thoughts, you know, to me, surprisingly clear because he's making lists and things of that nature, which surprises me. It's like, is what Kant has come to town with him, and Nietzsche's there, and Kierkegaard's in there, and they're all kind of hanging out. But I had so many, I won't say questions, had a lot of comments. I'm looking forward to hearing what you have to say and having you flesh it all out for me because otherwise it'll just take forever to ask every little question. And like Isabel said, every question that I had that led to another thing, and it made me wonder about what that meant, precedence of procedure. But then again, I think about within the sciences, you know, sometimes, who's the lady that did all the research on the corn, the colors of corn? And as a result, she was able to find like a pattern in DNA and how the genome, when like I don't remember either, but she spent her whole life just digging away at the color of corn and discovered something. So there's something to be said about digging in to procedure, and you find truth there. So that's what I mean. Like my brain went down like 2 hours thinking about that because that was one little paragraph. And so
yeah. So you're right to point out that sometimes the rhetoric here gets pretty heated. Some of them are, you know, zingers, and some of them are, you know, almost outlandish. And we'll get to that a little bit. But one thing to note in all of that is there's a definite tone here. I mean, he says the tone is one of shock and diffidence and restraint. That's the basic reaction that is aimed at here. But there's also a fair amount of exasperation. There's a fair amount of frustration. You can. It's not always the case when you're reading Heidegger. You say, well, when he was writing this, he was probably pissed, right? And I don't mean drunk, right? You know, so there's, you know, yes, he's salty, and there's some things he's salty about, and we need to, you know, focus on what he's salty about and why. There definitely is absolutely value in truth and pursuit of truth in modern science, but he definitely is. He definitely has a thrust here towards the whole institutional side of it, and that whole institutional side of it is something like truth becoming an afterthought on what science is about, something like that. And we'll get to that when we get to the actual science pieces. And I think it's fair to say that that is a critique which is sounder about the institutional side of it and sounder about the social sciences and humanities side of it than it is about the hard sciences side of it.
Right, because I was worried he was saying basically by its very structure, almost it's not capable of being redeemed or something like that. Like And I don't think that's true at all. Like you said, I think there are really true scientific endeavor, or was worthwhile scientific endeavors that don't fall into the camps you just mentioned.
Right, but he will say that as, you know, it is a way of arriving at, you know, reams of correct results, and that's the formula he wants to put it into. But the underlying criticism is something like that there isn't any truth in it, and that is meant to be both a damning indictment. Here it is at page 112, very end of section 73, right? It must aim to carry out what's carried out, namely the entrenchment of the abandonment of being, or in short, the absence of truth in all science. And he's not saying that science doesn't discover any truths. He's saying something quite different from that. But science wants, in its self-understanding, wants to be a finding out of what is and a discovery of truth and in service of truth. It wants to be a high ideal that is serving those things, you know, for nobly for their own sake, for the sake of knowing. And he's seeing in plenty of the tendencies, the machination-like tendencies, so to speak, and the institutional-like tendencies of science in the modern world, that it's being dragged away from that. In what way is it being dragged away within that? It's being dragged away from that in that the science that matters is the science that has engineering utility, and it has engineering utility because it is immediately applicable by a firm. Science is being dragged, knowledge being dragged away from truth in the sense that the humanities are becoming newspaper reporting as part of the publishing industry, right? So what's the point of that? The point of that is that there's a focus on the practical, a focus on the technical, a focus on the what works, that is a matter of being plugged into the surrounding machination structures of the whole society, that winds up dragging a practical and outcomes-oriented functionalist understanding of what science is trying to do, that is so functional that concern for truth in the abstract becomes obtuse, right? It's not the point anymore. The point is to achieve an effect, and the effect to be achieved is something which plugs into an exterior power center outside of the university, right? That brings it resources, or brings it, you know, importance, brings it social role, and that the same sort of functional thinking that can happen inside mechanical explanation can also happen in how you organize departments and how you incentivize students and all the rest of it. And you can wind up turning the whole thing into an engineering school with the thing that it is trying to engineer is more power, something like that. And when that becomes the goal, the goal of the supposed university is something more like being plugged into an ongoing power accumulation game in the modern world, rather than anything like what the word university actually means, which is service to one truth, right? So that's the kind of thing he's talking about there. Does that mean that chemistry doesn't know truths about chemicals? Absolutely not. And you'd be the first to admit that. Okay. I know that both Alex and Alexandra said they just want to listen, so I'm not going to ask them. But Josh, do you have first impressions?
Yeah. There are, it seems to me that there are a couple of, well, I'll throw in 3 different ways that I'm going to try and stand still here so I don't nauseate certain people in the room by walking while I'm talking. That there are, for the sake of argument, 3 different ways that one can place Heidegger, and in particular what he's trying to get us to understand, say in this chapter. And one way, you know, says, well, Heidegger's saying, oh, you know, we need to appreciate, instead of being stuck and rooted to specific intersubjectively produce schemes of understanding, and then simply regurgitate those schemes endlessly, sort of almost on autopilot. We need to find a way to become re-enchanted with the freshness of the world, and the way that becoming aware of it allows us to free ourselves from being stuck mindlessly within our kind of our machinations. So that's one way, and I think there are many interpreters of Heidegger that read him that way. They read him in conjunction with authors like Thomas Kuhn. That we need to look at science in terms of its capability of producing revolutions in its ways of thinking, rather than looking at it as this sort of cumulative process of ascertaining truth, which again is just another way of thinking of science in terms of regurgitating, hidden or presuppositions that one never allows oneself to get past. Another way of thinking, and I think, Jason, I sort of heard in your comments the second way, which is a kind of a distinguishing, I could be wrong about this, you can correct me, distinguishing Heidegger from, say, postmodernist thinkings that sort of like Foucault that would tie in truth to power, and say that, well, it's not a question of ever securing scientific truth from the influences of cultural power, but of understanding how power sort of flows through all of us, and creates values and then changes those values, including the values that produce scientific schemes. But the way that I'm looking at this chapter is through the eyes of the way that I interpret Derrida's understanding of Heidegger, which is that and this all rests on a particular way of understanding time, temporality, Heidegger's understanding of temporality, which really sits at the bottom of all this. I think that it's a much more radical notion of temporality than one that says, don't get stuck in scheme. We have schemes and we get stuck in them, and we have to find a way from time to time, or as often as possible, to be aware that we're of this danger of getting stuck in our schemes. Whereas I think what you're seeing here is Heidegger, and in his formulations of machination and lived experience, is that he's including among those that he's taking to task or critiquing, those that are champions of this notion of science as being built into itself the possibility of continually revolutionizing its understanding. He says, because even those notions still rest on the notion of the subject-object binary, of the subject representing a world, beings. The objects are the world of beings, and you have the subject that puts these objects in front of itself, even when it tries to be, say, in the guise of a scientist who's trying to be as unbiased as possible. Nevertheless, to the extent that the scientist sees themselves as producing a scheme that is attempting to represent the world in some way, they are still understanding the world in the way that Heidegger is trying to get us beyond. So yeah, that's kind of the way that I
So I largely actually agree with the last part, in the sense that I do think that he is trying to get beyond that understanding, and he thinks that understanding as something which is founded in a past metaphysics, and it may be like most exemplified by like Descartes Cartesian metaphysics, and maybe positivism around his day, including its neo-Kantian varieties. And I think that he is trying to get to a more, I'm going to put it this way, immediate, intuitive, philosophical experience access to the problems of philosophy, so to speak, including the problems of time and the problems of arising, appearing. But at bottom, all that is about trying to, from Heidegger's point of view, rescue truth from being submerged in a particular ideology about science or something like that, right? Truth is something which is of immediate, intuitive, philosophical relevance for people all the time, right? And it's not a schema. And he truth is a word for the outside of the schemas and the things which is being served outside of those schemas. It's not something which is produced inside one of the schemas. And there's a tendency of the modern machination versions of not just philosophy and scientific method, but the whole institutional apparatus around them that turns something, that whole set of things into something like a truth-producing machine, right? And machine-produced truth isn't truth to Heidegger. Truth goes back to immediate experience, and it has to be grounded in immediate experience, and it is a historical happening in the life of a particular living person, right? Responding to reality, something like that, and it needs to anchor there. And he thinks that all kinds of things about time, as you say, anchor there. There are other philosophers, in his time and after him, who I think are still going in that direction, so to speak, following that up, so to speak. But a lot of later thinkers, from my point of view, just mine Heidegger for ammunition against the people he's fighting here, rather than actually agreeing with his reasons for fighting them, right? So that's not my interest, right? I'm interested in the philosophical debate he's having with the other folks in the tradition, all the way back to the Greeks, but also including contemporaries, people around us now, rather than being interested in how people after him have agreed with this or that aspect of him, or used this or that aspect of him for their, if I put it this way, intramural fights with the other people he's arguing with. But I don't disagree with the point about how he's criticizing modern Cartesian philosophy, something like that, is that it's caught in a subject-object distinction that doesn't have access to meaning of being, something like that. And some of that is things which are already there in Being in Time, or even the Phenomenology project before him. Some of the Greeks are already there, I mean. But he's definitely taking them further here. And there's also, in this chapter particularly, there's a sense in which he doesn't think that the lessons of Being in Time have been heard, right? He doesn't think that people have taken the message from what he was trying to do there. And that to me is a sign that the typical readings of Being in Time are not his own intention. That doesn't mean that there isn't merit in them for their own sake, but he's not satisfied with what people took from Being in Time when he's writing this chapter. If that helps.
Mm-hmm.
Is that fair?
Yeah. So would you say that what he's saying is that truth, an empirical truth, is independent of the
he's saying that truth
in a realist sense, independent?
Well, so he talks about how the experience of Phusis and the experience of Aletheia was never properly grounded, and that was a road not taken, something like that. And when he talks about the other beginning is going to focus on time in a new way and on the event, he's talking about the unique and transpiring in time and actual nature of all truth, right? There's a notion of truth going back to the metaphysical stuff that sees truth only in generalities and only in abstractions and only in eternals, whereas for Heidegger, truth is something which actually essentially happens in time. It happens, as like something more like events of revelation of Dasein being open to being, is seized by being and is appropriated by being, with the message radiated into it, so to speak. And that sense of appropriation by the truth and a mission to serve the truth that is doing the appropriating of the mind is a very different notion of truth than truth is only things which are universally agreeable abstractions about large classes, something like that, right? Truth for Heidegger is not an operator. It's not an agreement operator. It's not an after the fact operator. It's not a logical thing. And when he's looking around at contemporary philosophers, he's like, when these people talk about being and they think it means something like to be is to be an existential quantifier in a logical theory, right? He thinks he's trying to talk about the color green with blind people. They can't see the thing he's looking at, right? There are people whose predecessors or predecessors of their predecessors once wrote down something about the experience of seeing the color green. They've never seen the color green in their lives, and they're just talking about it. But for Heidegger, you have to go back to actually talking about what it is to see green, and that's the sense in which I get of this focus in the other beginning on the event, and the event is taking place in history and as the unique, right? And that's from Heidegger's point of view, that is a fundamental ontological stance sort of claim, right? The things which happened to one person once as qualia appearing to them are real, and they have the character of event. That's the if he's got an underlying dispute with traditional metaphysics, it's something like that. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
Okay, good questions though. Plenty to get to. I want to get through. We got one more. Christian, you want to go through first impressions?
Yeah, sure. Let me get my video on here. Yeah, so I don't know if I have much more to add than what you guys have um gone through already, but I did do I think a little over half of the reading. I didn't get through all of it. I got up to the science part basically. So I
That's
still
most
need to
of it.
read. Yeah, so I got probably most of it. But so I'm looking forward to reading that. And some of what you guys have had to say about that part already has been interesting. But just of the part that I did read so far, yeah, I'm kind of in Joe's camp. I mean, it's pretty dense, and I found it pretty difficult and obscure. But I'm trying to follow along with it. And um, one thing that I would like to get to today, if we can. So, I agree. I think you guys were just sort of talking there about how this is not just a project that's Heidegger's not simply just trying to re-enchant the world, or it's not like that. Heidegger is still this is still about the question of being, and the way that I read it anyway. And Heidegger seems to be saying that somehow this machination that he's viewing as a kind of fundamental comportment or an understanding of being, which on the one hand he seems to think sort of characterizes the modern age especially, but I mean he also seems to think that it's been there in one form or another since Plato. That somehow this has distorted our understanding of being, and he seems to be saying that this is what has led to what he's calling the abandonment of beings by being. And what I'm really curious to get a grasp on is, and so I mean, I think this is important to Heidegger. It's not just that Heidegger cares that things are appearing meaningless to us now. I mean, I think he thinks that Nietzsche was misread in the same way. I mean, yes, that maybe that is the case, but that's not what's fundamentally at issue. I mean, I think this is for Heidegger. He's pursuing this because he sees it as a kind of distorted understanding of being, and he wants to use it as a kind of a clue to get back to the correct understanding of being. And what I want to get a grasp on is the connection here between, it seems that this machination understanding of being leads to, what is this abandonment? I mean, what he refers to it as a hollowness at one point. It reminds me of in the Question Concerning Technology essay where he's talking about like, what is it, the plane left abandoned on the tarmac or something. He's talking about this sort of abandoned equipment, and I'm really interested in what is Heidegger seeing there. I mean, you can read the early Heidegger in a sense, early Heidegger seems to think that being is like something analogous to significance, or depending on how you want to define that. But he is seeing these things as, yes, certainly devoid of significance, but I think he really means it when he says abandoned by being. And so I'm trying to make the connection there. Like, what is being for Heidegger such that he sees it abandoning beings in this way? So I'm not clear on everything yet. I'm just trying to kind of follow along and put it all together. So yeah, I'm just looking forward to kind of listening to you guys today.
Yeah, well, I definitely want to flesh that out, but I'll give Pete a first shot. Pete?
Yeah, so I have a explanation for machination and how it relates to our modern technological age, the Gestell, which is when being has abandoned us. And he says somewhere in this section 2 that machination has been with us since the Greeks. So how are we to make sense of that? Because it seems like today machination is all about commodification, and all things are products that show up for us. How did this work back in Greek times? And where machination would come in then, I think, is, let's say, a potter who's making pots, and the potter needs to make 6 pots because they're going to sell them tomorrow in the agora at their stall. And so to make 6 pots, they need this much clay and this much water. And so they have it in ready reserve for when they make the pots. And the potter is going to make the same 6 pots. So he's just making the same object over and over again. And then the next day, somebody buys a pot at the market, takes it home, unwraps it, and now that pot presence is for the family, and the family has the physics experience of the pot. It's revealed to them. It presences in their house. It becomes part of their house. There, the pot is working in the physicist understanding of being. The potter's understanding of the pot is the machination understanding. He put the resources together. He made the same thing he did. They're all the pots are the same. He's lined up his ordering up of the pots that he's going to need to sell tomorrow. So the machination understanding of being is already there for the Greeks. It's just not the dominant one. So if you say, what's the dominant understanding of being? How do the Greeks relate to the world around them? And the dominant understanding might be what they pick up when they go to see a tragedy, or when they go to see the mystery religions. And that's what defines their understanding of being. Now, what's happened with the Gestell is, in our present age, the dominant understanding of being is machination. So we understand all things as consumer items that are ready to be ordered from Amazon and delivered to us. We might still have an understanding of being that involves going to church and going to mass, or it involves going to the sports stadium and being a fan. So, the Greeks had different understandings of being. We have our present understanding of being. The issue for Heidegger is that today, in the Gestell, machination has become the dominant understanding of being, and the others no longer shine for us. And a big part of this story is Descartes and the subject. And when we became subjects with a bunch of objects out there, becoming the subject of experiencing what's out there, being able to have packaged experiences that we can enjoy, that also became part of machination that we have today in our present age, where it dominates our understanding of being. And so that's my spin on machination. Thank you.
First, Christian, any reactions before I go with my own?
Yeah, Pete, that's all helpful. That sounds largely right to me. I think that you were kind of reacting to the thing I said there about I think I mentioned some kind of ambiguity about, is this machination something that's been with us, you know, from the time of the Greeks, or is it primarily a modern thing? And I think that you addressed that nicely. The thing that I'm still trying to understand is, what is the connection between the machination and the hollowness of beings and the abandonment
Yep.
of beings by being? So that's kind of what I'm
So
trying to wrap my head around.
right. So I mean, we can talk about the machination in the way that he talks about it in just a second, but I want to just first mention a little historical thing. So machination in the Greeks, there's a place where this direct connection made between the power understanding of being and the Greeks. This is in Plato's Sophist. So the Parmenidean stranger is explaining to young Socrates and the other interlocutors, right, the war of the giants over being, which is between Homer and Heraclitus and the Fluxus camp over here, who thinks that all is change and nothing really is, only becoming is real, and the Parmenidean camp, which is pretty much just Parmenides and a few Parmenidean strangers and Platonists hanging off from it. And the Parmenidean stranger presents the present company as being sitting in the no man's land between this, trying to find out, trying to understand what is going on, but in this war of the giants over being. And he asks the question, what is it that the two camps actually agree upon when they're talking about being? Is there anything that they both mean by the word when they use it? Can I find a common ground between the Fluxus and the permanentists about what being is? And the Parmenidean stranger's answer is, I guess the one thing they all agree upon is that something only counts as a being if it has the power to do something or to be affected somehow. It is the power to do or be affected that marks something as a being across the camps, as opposed to in one of the two camps, is the claim. So you find that already in the Sophist, that the sense of being is, it counts as existing because it has a power. It brings about effects. And of the two, being affected and affecting, very soon the balance tilts towards the being affected is an entirely subsidiary thing, and the affecting is the important thing. So to be a cause, to bring something about, to be a power, to have effects, and to be a being are already being very closely tied, even in like Plato's Sophist. They're not as like Parmenides' doctrine on the subject or as Heraclitus' doctrine on the subject, but it's the thing about which they agree, right? Okay. Heidegger makes the point, and several times in this, that in the Middle Ages, you get the notion of the beings are created beings. Everything other than God is a created being, right? So you get the uns creatum, right? So all the things are creations, all the things are products, right? So the beings are what are the causes, but the beings as caused, as the uns creatum, are the products. You have chains of causation that go from the actual acting powers to their effects. The effects are also beings, but they're beings now as created beings. So we're moving from being as something which is an arising presence in itself that shines forth as truth for us, into we understand all the things that are as things caused by some prior power, right? So that's the first move towards power thinking. Yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, just real quick. So this is very much related to like this sort of Aristotelian analysis of causality, right? That you see people like Aquinas sort of taking up the idea of God as creator and imposing the formal or being the final cause maybe, and then imposing the form on the matter. And so you're sort of seeing this as
Aristotle bringing in the notion of substance, which is the idea that the material particulars, which are the things which are really real, have to have both a form and a substance and a matter, right? That they have to have some form imposed upon the matter in order to actually be a full substance. And before they have both of those parts, they're not a full substance yet. And so they aren't really a thing yet. They don't have being yet. They are a factored mental concept only, unless they have put both those two together. But a full substance, a full ousia, a full being, has to have both a matter and a form, right? That's the thing you particularly get in Aristotle. And then he'll say that the imposition of the form on it is what makes it be an act. And before that, it is only potential. So that to be actual, to be an act, to be a full substance, these are correlate terms in Aristotle. But behind them all is this notion that the causing of things and the imposing of the form upon them and the shaping of them are effectively the same thing, right?
Yeah.
If you like, the important thing about any being is its information content, not its material content, right? You can make the material content out of rock or wood or whatever, but the thing that you make is the form, substance, information content you put upon it. Now, and then you understand those other material things as just other forms underneath it. And Platonists are defined as those who think it's forms all the way down, but leave that aside, right? The point is you get this notion that the causally forming is the creating, is the ruling of what the thing is. Okay. The next thing is if the meaning of the thing is something like its nature, is something like its essential powers, means all the web of relations that it runs into. This means that all of its meaning comes from the web of causal relations in which you can embed it. And this is what Heidegger gets at when he's talking about the machinations, and he talks about how there's a what does he say? It's the relation of unrelatedness, something like this. And what does he mean by that? The idea is if the thing is only all the things that it can do, then it is you've effectively, it has no essence left. It's been factored out to the web of relationships into which it enters. So in a way, the pure causal web view of a thing is that it is only its relations in the rest of the system.
So it has no intrinsic being. It's kind of dissolved just into what it can affect.
Its intrinsic being has become token in a system.
Yeah.
So this is on 104, section 67, toward the bottom of it. What does machination mean? That which is released to its own fettering. What are the fetters? The schema of thorough and calculable explainability, whereby everything draws equally close together to everything else, and becomes completely foreign to itself, indeed altogether other to itself, and not just foreign. The relation of unrelatedness. The point of that is the object dissolving into its relations in the system, right? So that only the actual relations in the system, only the schema is real, right? That is taking even the objects and dissolving them into the web of power relationships in which they are just, temporary standing forms, right? In the question concerning technology essay, Pete, which I think Pete might have alluded to earlier, in the question concerning technology essay, that way in which even the objects dissolve into standing reserve is what he calls the final form of enframing, or the final form of the technological way things are. And this is not, he's not saying any of this is not true about it, by the way. It's one thing about it. Sorry, what's the question?
Could you apply this to an example? I'm thinking of going back to, so start with the hammer as a present at hand object with its properties and attributes. Then move on from that to the hammer in terms of what we're using it for. Let's say a particular task, building a house. Then move back from that to a larger totality of relevant connections that include not just the hammer and the task and the house that's being built, but also our relationship within a intersubjective community, everything, a totality, what Heidegger is called the
So-
being of beings or world. And then one last step, the displacement of that referential totality. I would argue that what he's getting at here is the displacement of displacing occurrence. You only get to the understanding of being when you understand that the being is a displacing occurrence that projects world. It projects a new world, and so I guess what I'm. So give me your take on that.
I think the problem there is you're trying to jump ahead 3 steps, and it might not be a crazy place to go, but people aren't going to follow all 3 of the steps. So let's start with just chasing your hammer example a little further, right? Before we talk about any worlds or displacements of them or changes of meanings, right? Let's fully embed the hammer in its web of relations, right? The hammer that is used for hammering is being used to perform one of the functions that people who perform workman tasks need to perform. So it is produced in planned quantities, made available at the Home Depots of the world and the Ace Hardwares of the world as a piece of hardware goods that is organized and planned by economic planners and producing companies to have enough of them standing by for all of the people who need new hammers to come in and do all of their objects of hammering. And it sits alongside other things which are not hammers, but which have related marketability, related functionality to the same related social people. From that point of view, what is the hammer? The hammer is a part in an inventory at a hardware store, right? It is a piece of the it is a UPC code for a particular product produced with a particular manufacturing plant that has shipping requirements, inventory requirements. It has all those other things attached to it. It also has an economic value, right? And it's carrying value in these different places. And in the end, since you can make these on demand, the actual thing that matters most is forecasting the demand for hammers, making sure that the supply of hammers can be brought forth in economical terms, right? And that forecast of the supply and demand for hammers in order to provision the hammers to all the hardware stores where they're needed all the time is the maintenance of a standing reserve of capital to meet the desires, the abstract desires of all consumers and producers. So all consumers and producers meet the overall market with an overall set of demands, and there's a general plan for carving out all of those things to make sure that exactly the right number of hammers show up in exactly the right number of places for all the people to use them. When the hammer is not a producing tool in a workshop, right, but is an economic good in the nexus of hardware stores, right, that is, Heidegger says, it is at the point of dissolving into standing reserve. It has become stock, right? The individual essence that it had as an object and its individual uses and utilities were just whatever shapes were put on it to meet the particular sub-piece of demand that it was being related to. But the actual essence within it was just its essence as stock, as a certain amount of capital invested to meet a certain particular subset of demand. That turning of everything into standing reserve stock is the, as its actual meaning, as its economic meaning, as the meaning that matters most when you're dealing with it, is the reduction to standing reserve he's talking about in the question concerning technology essay. Machination is a step before that. Machination is just noticing that the thing entering into all of those webs of causal relationships is treating the effective reality of the thing as the equipmental contexture it fits into, right? It's the web of cause effect human purpose relations into which it fits, and therefore its utility in that sense that is its meaning. And the meaning that it has is just those relationships it enters into. So the other side of that is, on the one side, you have just this web of causal relationships, manipulable web of causal relationships. On the other side, what happens if you, from every good in existence, not just one hammer, but from every good in existence, you factored out that whole web? What's left over? What didn't you manage to capture with all that web of causal relationships, including all of the engineering relationships between one piece of material and another, the planning relationships between one economic activity and another, the supply and demand balancing relationships and all that kind of stuff? If you've taken out all of that, which is all of the, the fully plannable part of it, what's left? the answer is nothing except the subjective qualia of mere appearance of things to people. So we factored reality into the web of machination relations as the causal relations where there is science and planning and technology and purposes, which are serious, and a purely subjective pole of qualia appearing to us, which is a pure consumer good, right? And
But these are not objective causal relationship that Heidegger is describing in the first part of Being in Time. But doesn't he say that if we get down to simply staring at a present at hand object like a hammer, that we're failing to understand it anymore? And doesn't he say that that present at hand object, when we're simply disclosing it in that way, that that's derivative, that can never be considered the origin, and that all these other uses are tacked onto it, but the other way around, that the totality of relevance is always the starting point to understand what a thing is.
It's absolutely right that Being in Time is focused on this equipmental conjecture, totality of relevance and relevance for our purposes as being the way in which we actually project meaning onto the thing in terms of our ways of interacting with it. And you're also right that that to detach it from all of those meanings and just consider it as an object in itself, merely presencing before us, is in Being in Time presented as a an abstract scientific view, which only occurs later and only happens when we don't know how to deal with it, when we're not dealing with it in a confident and technological manner, so to speak. So you're absolutely right that that's exactly what he does in Being in Time, and he's not doing that here. What he's doing here is he's saying the pure equipmental contexture version of things and the pure representational scientific version of things that you get in like Cartesian scientific understanding, those work with one another. They dovetail with one another because both of them are going to treat these things as manipulable engineering objects. That the particular thing that has been factored out of them is everything about their meaning to the consciousness to which they are actually appearing. The meaning of the consciousness they're appearing may seem like it's the thing which matters for the whole equipmental contexture, but that's not the case under conditions of modern planning and science. The actual equipmental contexture that matters for it is the whole social, producer and interaction with it, right? It's not the way that the tool user experience it. It's the hardware store and the hammer producer and the forecaster of hammer demand and all of that, which determines what hammers exist and what they're listed for on Amazon, et cetera, right? So the idea is that it's still the case that these forms of understanding things are a form of revealing of them, that it is true about them. We are revealing truths about them when we do this. What's missing? What's missing is the event of appearing to the consciousness as true, the way in which the being of the object is appropriating the existence of the person that it is interacting with and assigning him a mission to understand truth about it. That's what's missing, right? That's the being sense that's there in physis or that's there in aletheia that is missing in the calculable world. And you can say that it's not entirely missing. It's been factored off into a utility concern over here, and the residual that is left is a deliberately subjective leftover that is thought of as causally unimportant because not constant enough across human beings and calculable enough across instances to be useful for anything, or we would have just made another objective relation out of that piece of it. So the lived experience that is left is like the subjective husk of the unplannable, and that's just a consumer good. It's movies and trips to the beach, as he says later, right?
Whereas Heidegger is saying that no, that's actually the revealing of truth that we need to focus on.
From Heidegger's point of view, the actual revealing of truth is when the human being standing before a reality is seized by the meaning of the being, which meaning of the being radiates into his existence, right? Dasein is not a subjective pole. Dasein is an open to the outside into which the meaningful being radiates, right? It is a place or site where meaning transpires because knowledge of truth transpires. But in the view of the machination world, right? truth is only something about this web of causal relationships. It's not something that it's an occurrence, right? And the thing which is left over as the lived experiences don't have any truth in them, really. They're just subjective qualia, and they don't rise to the level of truth because they don't rise to the level of being able to be universalized across minds. The only thing you can do with lived experiences from the Cartesian subjectivist point of view is testify about them honestly. But this results in the pursuit of lived experiences as, you want to go to a nice restaurant and take a picture of your food and show it to your friends so they can see what you're experiencing, right? Rather than actually eating the food, right? But again, this is the point he makes about the lived experiences are turning to something which lack all meditation and all privacy, right? They become a consumer good to be equalized and spread and shared, right? Communicated. But again, all of this, you were asking about why is there an emptying of meaning somehow involved in this move towards machination? Because it's fair to say that the machination view and the early Heidegger's pragmatic context of meaning, right, seem to be actually quite in line with each other, but only partly so. The part that he's not revoking at all is the idea that Dasein assigns meanings to things, learns meanings of things for their actual possibilities of interacting with them, possibilities of what they can do with them. But the things which Dasein does is not simply try to fulfill other people's subjective demands in order to maximize the utility that increases overall standing reserve, which is power accumulation, right? That's maybe an economic motive in all action. That's a side effect. But the truth motive in action is something else entirely. And he makes the same point here where he's talking about the modern misunderstanding of art. It's doesn't understand it as a way in which truth is encapsulated in a being that can then be seen, experienced, and understood. Instead, it's commended for cultural purposes. What does that mean? It means that the culture industry is thought of as one of these managed industries alongside the others, right? And it has a utility inside of that and a standing reserve value inside of that.
Kind of the point about artworks being put in museums that he made other places,
instead of being lived in. Yes. So okay. So I'm trying to get at your Christian. It's a very good question about in what sense is there any emptying here? And the emptying is always with respect to a standard he already has himself of what counts as the more meaningful, right? But the standard he has of the more meaningful is something like this: man as having the high calling to be the place or site of where truth is revealed, right? There's a, and this is why he gets to the sciences at the end of this. This is especially noteworthy in things like science, right? Is science for the sake of its utility in all those other senses, or is it for the sake of of ascertaining the truth or learning the truth, right? If it's the former, right, you wind up with a I mean, he's pretty scathing about what you wind up with, but the university becomes a business enterprise, and humanities becomes journalism, and the goal to which they are driving is that there is nothing surprising anymore, because everything has an explanation. And he predicts that the end result, if this manages to achieve everything that it is aiming at, is the consummation of boredom, right? Everything explainable and nothing essential happening. And you can, are the things he's being salty about things that he's unjust to be salty about? Are some of his, critiques of the businessification of modern science, typical cultural Marxist critiques of the university? Fair. Are some of them even, sort of class resentments about disappearing positions of privilege and authority, right? Probably. He talks about in one of the sections about the decisive positions evaporating as the average level rises, and this sort of thing. So you can critique all of the motives behind it, but the particular thing that he is claiming is happening is this sort of leveling and voiding of meaning. The place where I can see that there is well, two places I can see that there's this critique has more bite than just sort of that, you know, cultural distaste, if I can put it that way. When he's talking about historiography and history and the truths of history, I think he's on pretty strong ground about how the notion of what counts as truth and the notion of what counts as being that you get from a Cartesian or positivist worldview doesn't really have a place for the kind of truth that actually happens in history. That's the first essential point there. And the other is, this one's a little bit harder, but this factoring of everything into the calculable objective and the purely opinion lived experience, it has a consequence. And the consequence is that there is no truth about the things which where all goals are set and all values are posited and everything that actually matters and all meanings that actually matter occur. About those, there is no, because there is no truth, there is possibility of communication, but no possibility of anything like a spiritual authority or anything like an agreement, a worthy agreement, a worthiness of agreement. Agreement is pure happenstance at that point. Whereas you can have complete agreement on absolute standards of truth for the purely technological, right? So this tendency of getting a world in which everyone agrees on the technical questions and on the hard science questions, and everyone disagrees on all the meaning questions and all the purpose questions and all of the value questions, and has no means whatsoever of reaching anything, any sort of agreement with one another. That's where I think both the Nietzschean nihilism verdict or diagnosis before him and his own do have some sound ground. There is a danger in the factoring of truth into the objective things we can all agree upon, but we got to that agreement by taking everything subjective and quality alike out of them, right? And in the process, we ripped out all possible meaning, right? Except their meaning for equipmental context or sort of, you know, practical power purposes. And if you think people are going to agree about power, they're not. They're going to fight about power, right? So all you do is you have agreement on the technical details and a fight about power, and everything else is over here in the subjective box is, you know, just for subjective communication, but there's no truth about it. There are no values about it. There are no goals about it. This is a recipe for well-armed, violent disagreement, is the claim, right? And both Nietzsche and Heidegger were perfectly cognizant of that outcome, right? Heidegger in the Question Concerning Technology says, man exalts himself to the posture of Lord of the Earth, but precisely as the one, you know, so threatened. He comes to the brink of a precipitous fall where he becomes standing reserve himself, and man will be viewed as mere raw material, because why wouldn't he, right? And if everything else in this nexus of power relations is a mere raw material, and the only thing you care about is what you can do for power accumulation purposes, why wouldn't human beings be viewed the same way? They will. Dan?
Yeah, I think that you mentioned both like Nietzsche and Heidegger. I think they both also they went back to the Greeks and they realized that, like, reading their works and getting in touch with them, they realized that the Greeks, they used to have this another dimension, and they look with amazement at things, at everything, and they were like, and we kind of, once we got immersed into science and technology, we kind of lost this dimension completely. And that's kind of, to them, that's what it's this lack of meaning and nihilism and so on. And that's kind of like where we, something, unless we compare it, what we have now with what we used to be there, we don't see what we are missing. And there is no, it's a lack that we don't know what to do with it. We don't see, like, as you said, it's a tune or a lack that we don't know. We are not aware of it unless we compare it with something. And both of them, they went back to the Greeks, ancient Greeks, and said there was something there. And look at them, how amazed they were, and how they I don't know, again, another dimension was there, and then that disappeared. And they said,
I agree with you that is what they both do, but also Heidegger sometimes says, look at how much this was appreciated in the Greeks, and also say, and it all went wrong in the Greeks when they stopped grounding this thing which they appreciated. And so Nietzsche's understanding of the Greeks has a similar kind of love-hate relationship at times. So it's a bit more, at least for the pre-Socratics, a bit more Platonics, rosy-eyed, so to speak. With Heidegger, it's the same thing of they're an ideal for him, and the first beginning is an ideal for him, and a height to be reattained. But at the same time, he's also tends to detect the first missteps right there at the beginning, right? And that's to me questionable, right? There's a whole question of the reading tradition of how far along these things come. Sorry, Josh has a thought or comment.
Yeah, keep in mind that Heidegger critiques Nietzsche's notion of value, or any notion of value, as being a form of the present at hand. So given that, and also goal and value are forms of the present at hand because they presuppose a direction that's already been set in place. So given that, when you mentioned, for example, subjective qualia, as a remedy for getting caught in, kind of a, an already set up kind of a plan, how does qualia avoid the notion of present at hand? Do qualia are they persistently self-identical? Do they have properties? Do they have attributes? These are all things that one associates with something that is present at hand, that most importantly is continually present as what it is.
So the qual on their own do not have the permanence that a Aristotelian, categorical attribute or essential attribute has. That's exactly what they don't have. They're momentary, but what they do have is a groundedness in actually occurring. There's a section at the end of very bottom of 106 where he says he's talking. This is it's almost an aside while he's talking about the gigantic and talking about the difference between quality and quantity. But he says quality is here meant as the basic characteristics of the quale, of the what, of the essence, of being itself. And that little gloss there is trying to tell you something like what the other philosophers call just the qual is very close to what Heidegger is calling being itself, how being essentially occurs, right? Which is the appearing to. The phenomenological training goes all the way down, so to speak. I agree with you, by the way, about the point about him being critical of Nietzsche, especially on value. He thinks value is a trap, conundrum thicket, not a solution, not a way out. Because for Nietzsche, value thinking winds up being a matter of trying to have will positing get you out of nihilism, and it can't. It can't ground itself. But he does in our chapter 22, basically underwrite the claim of Nietzsche that the problem in modernity is a lack of all goals in a sufficient sense, where goals is not for Heidegger something which we're setting for ourselves because we're Nietzschean supermen, which again you're right that he critiques, but is instead something more like a purpose or duty to which we are assigned. It would be the Heideggerian formulation of that. But he is looking for something like that, for a purpose or duty to which we are assigned, in a service of truth. But the truth in the service of which is not the same as the Cartesian version. The Cartesian version wants to factor out everything you wouldn't that is a secondary quality, because it merely is how it appears to you. It wants to factor out everything that people could disagree upon. It wants to stick with only the primary qualities, which means the position and mass, basically, and the reproducible result. And all of that is aimed at a factoring out of the actual experience only the parts which are going to be reproducible and cause agreement. But the reason for that is to achieve something firm and constant in the sciences. That's the reason for stripping the actual experience of everything subjective and qual-like about it. And Heidegger's point here is just that stripping is stripping away how being essentially occurs. It's stripping away the event-like character of truth appearing. And
It's factoring out the real in time.
yes, correct. It's the event happening in time, the actuality the actual occurrence part, the revelation to mind part, all of those aspects of what is actually going on as how being essentially occurs have been abstracted from as though they didn't matter, as though throwing them away won't matter. But to Heidegger, throwing them away does matter. You're going to get all truths of history wrong when you do that, for example. Thus the critique of historiography. Josh, further comment, or I don't know if you have still from the
No.
last one.
Oh, I'm sorry. I'll put it down. No, I'm intrigued by the way that you articulated quality in terms of just a momentary coming into existence or coming into presence and then
Yes.
passing away, because that opens up, all kinds of, I mean, it forces us to change how we understand how you build an edifice of knowledge, or whether it makes sense anymore to even talk about, analysis in
Right.
terms of building an edifice, right? Because I mean, if we are, beholden to the qualia, then it brings the question of history and memory and all the things that we might want to resort to and clutch onto as steady, pre-existing, sort of anchors. It changes all that.
So it does actually keep history in his sense without necessarily historiography, and it keeps memory, as we saw in the what is called thinking, thoughtful memory discussion that's considerably later, that he's going to keep. But history as what actually happened, and the thoughtful memory preserving of the past event as something which is actually reproducible, as you can have the intellectual intuition yourself, and the thoughtful sayings that are the words that can summon the experience and bring another to it if they're able to go there and see it and therefore experience it for themselves. Those sorts of things that they're thematic in later Heidegger for how these things are transmittable to one another, right? That's where that's the side of history meaning, so to speak, that the other beginning has to focus on, and the way in which that differs from the standards of truth or edifice building science that you had in the Cartesian world is it's no longer focused on something being valuable because it is universalizable, because it is a general rule. A historical decision may happen only once, it may never come again, but the human being confronting that decision and making that decision and sending the world down this rather than that actual trajectory of through its possibilities, that sense of historical action, and both intuitively and as something people actually act upon, doesn't require stable across all time generalization in order to be real, right? And the claim in the other beginning thrust of things is that the essential decisions in the history of thought have that historical character. They do not have the historical character of, in order to arrive at truth, I must, find what Plato and Aristotle and someone else all did together, and find the one universal through all the things that they did, and stick with that generalization because that's sure to find me a truth that will generalize. No, we're not trying to learn from past examples in that perfect copy sense. Instead, we are confronting similar historical situations that face us with similar but not the same choices, which are essential decisions. And the idea that we're navigating essential decisions with this immediate intellectual intuition is very far from, I need to find a universal law that all these things fall under. Does that help?
Yeah, it does.
Yeah, I mean, some of this stuff you only get when you sort of start connecting the dots between where he's going here with other beginning, with where he comes out in sort of later Heidegger and the what is called thinking and mindfulness and so forth. But I think the direction, the consistent direction, as Christian was saying the other time, you could tell this is still Heidegger. There's still a consistent direction where he's pointing to. He's always pointing towards the unique and the one time as the authentic and the real, right? Because material particulars aren't specific enough for him to count as the really real. He's more Aristotelian than Aristotelian that way. He gets to live one life his once, right? He doesn't get to live the life of a material particular in all of its abstract generality. Okay. We met, this was pretty much just spontaneous discussion out of first reactions, which is great. It's a sign that things are lively, that we got this far without, even trying to touch on any of the stuff I wanted to do didactically. I want to, because it's been free form like this, I want to give people a chance to ask questions other about what we've been saying so far about parts of the text before I just do anything more sequential than that, because we've already raised so much of what's in this area. Jim, I know you have 38 questions waiting, but I don't know how many of them have already been answered. He's not fast enough on the mute.
Well, to be honest with you, yeah, it's been, I'm learning a lot, and a lot of questions are getting answered as I shut up and listen to you and others talk. So how does that the whole hammer, the way that you described just the process of inventory, that absolutely fascinating, and to hear it articulated that way to help me understand, because everyone's got great questions. Josh in particular was asking about that, and I just think it's better if I keep listening. I've got a lot of that was answered. It was great. It's awesome. Just keep going. So it's great.
Okay. 3 levels of time on the page. Pete, did you want to bring up something about 3 levels of time?
So we've been having this chat with Alex, and he was saying, well, aren't there really 3 levels of sort of being here in contributions? And I said, well, the 3 levels are there in being and time. Just one of them, the clearing, is not theme. He doesn't discuss it in division 1 and 2. And then I linked to a page I have.
Got it.
That has the 3 different, those 3 levels in different contexts. And Alex asks, well, what about time? And one of the ones on the page is time. So I was just indicating that.
Okay, yeah, thanks. All right, so I think I already mentioned, I want to come back to resonating. Why is he calling this the resonating? The whole chapter is called the resonating. What the heck is resonating? So yes, it is a musical metaphor. Something is ringing. What is ringing? If you go to his section where he's trying to explain why he's calling it the resonating, absolutely everything there is about the abandonment of being, beings by being. None of it is talking about anything being struck and sounding, right? Only at the very end of it will he say that this must sound. That's the only reference to resonating in the section which is trying to describe why he's calling it resonating. I don't know if anyone else noticed this, but what is it? This is on page 91, section 55 on the resonating. That's where he explains what it is. But the last paragraph, the resonating must sound out of this abandonment and must start with the unfolding of the forgottenness of being, in which the other beginning resounds, and so does being. What's the point of this? The resonating of truth. There's something ringing in Heidegger's ears, that the world is out of joint and something is ringing in his ears. And the thing which is ringing in his ears is the fact that no one else is hearing this, right? What is it? Something that no one else is hearing? It's essential occurrence of being. Why is there an essential occurrence of being which is ringing in his ears, but which is missing for everybody else? On page 91, he talks about the obviousness, flattening, and downright unrecognizability of being in the prevalent understanding of being. So in being and time, you're saying, what does this word being mean? And what are the different ways in which it's used? And why is it ambiguous? And why don't all the modern philosophers agree on what they mean by being? Right? Why is this word such a problem? Why does it have such a history? And if he chases through that history and he asks what it means now, it is the emptiest and flattest concept. And if you ask the most up-to-date, logical positivist, you will discover that to be is to be an existential quantifier in a logical formula of a free variable, right? In other words, to be is to be something you can count in logic, right? That's what you mean. You can put a backwards e in front of it. You can perform existential quantification on it, right? That's what it means to be. So from Heidegger's point of view, this is unrecognizable as being in any original sense. It's unrecognizable as what the Greeks meant by it, for example. Sorry, Dan, you have a thought or question before?
Yeah, I was wondering now that he, like being in time and so on, he used like attunement, mood. I think that those kind of are like more specific forms of this kind of resonating. Like we resonate in specific way that being manifested to us. But now with this resonating, he kind of goes to the core of it. It's being itself. Like it's very, but I think it's in the same line with attunement or with mood and so on. It's the same kind of concept, but it's more fundamental.
So back in part one, you're right. Back in part one, he did say that these fundamental attunements and these mood attunements are one of the ways in which, we can be in touch with being, and we can, hear being. And he spoke of this sense of out of jointness, right, back in the beginning in part one, right? So I think that you're right that the resonating is meant to go along with an attunement, but I'm trying to point out that there is something ringing in Heidegger's ears like a deafening kettle drum that nobody else can hear, right? And yes, you can call that a matter of attunement. It also is just a matter of obsession, right? He's focused on what the meaning of being has been through the history of philosophy down, all the way down to now. And he's been tracking all the changes, and he writes a whole book about it. And he looks around saying, did any of you guys follow that? And everyone is like nodding along, says, ah, yes, lived experience. And then they don't care about what being means. And, the fact that being has been mysterious forever and that no one has decided what it means is entirely par for the course. And everyone is perfectly happy to go back to sleep and consider that to be a logical quantifier. Right. And he's like, I cannot even recognize the thing you're talking about here. Sorry, Josh.
Would you say that being is being as the in-between would imply a transit, a change in the sense that maybe not simply that, let's say, well, a qualia, right, emerges and affects we who are experiencing the qualia. It's not just affecting us, but it is, we come back to ourselves from that experience. So it changes. This transit is a kind of a two-way, relation in which
I see what you're getting at. I see what you're getting at.
Everything has changed at the same time. We on the one end and the qualia on the other.
So and you can leave aside the qualia for a second. I mean, you're right that there's a focus on a between, right, and there's a focus on an ongoing event. But the between is, for Heidegger's point of view, the between is Dasein, right? The being is seizing Dasein. Our existence as a consciousness is being seized by contents, by qualia that radiate themselves into us, take over our being, become the form of our being at that moment or that time. What does Descartes says? Descartes says, I'm the kind of being that is a consciousness, and a consciousness is the kind of being that is its thoughts. Dasein is its thoughts. Dasein is its experiences, right? Dasein having qualia radiated into it and Dasein changing are the same thing, right? It is an openness to radiated meaning, right? So if an in-between openness to radiated meaning has meaning radiated into it, right? That is the event of that existence, that Dasein changing, right? The whole stream of the contents of Dasein are the stream of the meanings that being has radiated into it. It is called Dasein because it is the kind of being that happens in the there where the radiated being meaning can appear, right? So from Heidegger's point of view, the human being's calling, the thing that gives him a high and exalted destiny, the thing that makes him other than a factory product, is that he is the place or site where truth appears, right? We're all assigned the mission to be the truth recorder, to be the truth sounder, where truth sounds. And that is, yes, that is changing us. It's not just changing us in the sense of manipulating some underlying form that is already there, thought of as some object that we've, bent into a new shape as though it were just a plastic form on a material body. No, the meaning content, the thought content, the consciousness content of our existence is what we are, right? We are the stream of those being contents. That's why we're a form of being ourselves, right? So Josh, do you have comment on that?
No, I like that. I resonate with that really.
Yes.
The way I
Yes.
think about it too. Yeah.
And I think that perspective on Dasein will come up later in this book when we talk about grounding Dasein, but I think that part has carried over directly from being in time, and Heidegger never lets go of that. That sense of the Dasein as the between. And by the way, that notion that the between is the place where truth transpires, Heidegger didn't invent that notion. I don't know if people know this, but that you find that all the way back in the Greeks. You find that in the Platonists and Neoplatonists. They'll talk about the metaxy as the between. Anyway, the notion that there's a something about the mind or the consciousness, which is a between that has contact with truth, right? Is something you find in the Platonists and Neoplatonists as well, right? It's the reason that Plato invented the notion of the ideas, which Heidegger is often very down upon, but the reason he invented the notion of the ideas is he was trying to explain how a finite temporal mind can make contact with something like an eternal and everlasting and objective truth. The mind looks like it might be completely subjective. It looks like it's completely temporal, but the things it can have contact with can be entirely truth-like, not and entirely objective, and they can be entirely eternal from Plato's point of view. How is that possible, right? And how is that possible has to be that these two things can come into conformity with the third, the idea. That's why he comes with the notion of the ideas. But the point is, the idea is, or notion, is exactly about this metaxy. It's about exactly about this between of how do you get the historical happening of a truth, right? And Heidegger is also focused on the historical happening of a truth, but he's focusing on it as the actual temporal event in the conscious mind. But the point that I'm getting at when he's talking about there's something ringing in his ears is being means those sorts of things to him. And whenever he stands in front of a tree, right, that's the kind of thing he's thinking about when he's thinking about being, and he's thinking of it as the ground of data and information and contact with actuality that we start from our sense of truth and wonder, something like that. And he hears people talking about it as the most abstract and emptiest concept that is a quantifier in a logical theory. And he's like, I do not recognize this as being.
So
Being
Jason,
has left the building.
Yeah, I think everything that you guys have been talking about for the last few minutes has just been really brilliant, and you've articulated things really well. It's been helping a lot. I was wondering with this resonating concept, it seemed to me like there was a little, I think I totally pick up what you're saying about it. And I think in this larger project of Heidegger trying to found this new, this other beginning of philosophy, it seemed like it was connected with this notion of the forgottenness of being, and that somehow the resonating has to be like it's like he's making an appeal. It's not just to Heidegger, but it needs to resonate with other people as well. Just there seemed to be a connection there.
You're absolutely right. You're absolutely right. He does want this to sound, and what he means by sound is he doesn't want to be the only one hearing this. He wants this to become something that other people can see and notice. He thinks that the things that people are going to be able to see and notice, if I can put it this way, is the secondary and knock-on effects of being abandoning beings or meaning disappearing. They're going to be able to see and acknowledge those knock-on effects, even if they can't see the direct miss in meaning of being that he's seeing, or that's so loud for him, right? But the thing which he thinks has to be raised as the thing which can cause this abandonment by being to be noticed. He thinks that the abandonment by being can be noticed, that can lead to people unforgetting the forgottenness of being. They first have to notice that they forgot about it, right? They have to become aware of the plight, right? But the way that they're going to notice that is, if I can put it this way, the symptoms, right? They're not going to notice the disease, they're going to notice the symptoms. And that's some of the stuff he talks about in the machination lived experience, in some of the things about the gigantic, in some of the things about the some of the things about science, which may be harder for people to arrive at because it's harder for them to agree with him. It's more contentious, so to speak. But you look at on page 123, end of 23, these themselves will eventually be unable to conceal the character of boredom any longer, in case there remains at that time a vestige of cognitive power, in order to at least be shocked by this state and to uncover it itself, and that which is gaping open there, namely the abandonment of beings by being. His point there is something like, if the entire edifice of institutionalized science issues in a disappearance of truth and a journalistic frenzied attempt to keep boredom at bay, at some point people will notice this because it's so glaring, and the discrepancy between this and the mission to understand the truth of nature that was set by Plato and Socrates back in the Greeks, right, will be clearly seen to not be eventuating, something like that. So he's expecting there to be something that can shock in the symptoms, right? And what he is trying to do is be the thoughtful sayer who could put the words together with the experience. He can explain why this is happening. He can put words together with it and say, the thing that is happening is you're watching nothing happening to being. This is what happened when you take being and you remove all content from that concept. You will see nothing happening to being. You will see being evaporating. You will see your high allegiance to truth as a noble calling becoming trivialized and unimportant. And I have the words to describe what that is when it's happening. So what the resonating is meant to be is an awakening. It's an attempt at an awakening, right? Trying to bring people to see something. But the way to do that is to come up with the adequate words to describe what is happening. Josh?
Earlier, Jason, you mentioned that you thought that Heidegger's critique of science was more apt when it came to the human sciences and the social sciences, as opposed to the natural sciences.
Yes.
Maybe, speak a little bit about what happens to, since the natural sciences in particular are as Heidegger sort of recounts them, are built up around mathematization and the geometrization of the world, such that actually I'm mixing a little Husserl in here too, but at any rate, such that and that produces this peculiar notion of exactitude that we find in the natural sciences. So what would you say about why, that this, we might be able to get a better sense here of by looking at what happens to our understanding of the grounding of, say, propositional logic and mathematics, that that allows us to understand why we need to, or that why allows us to understand why Heidegger needs to sort of dethrone all the sciences, including the physical sciences, from their pedestal.
So I think if he wants to just dethrone the physical sciences from the pedestal, he's got a tough road to hoe. But I mean, he's not going to do it, is what I'm trying to say. But the actual target there is the positivist view that only that notion of truth counts as genuine truth. That's the thing which is the actual target there. There is a bit of a critique of the institutionalized version of even the physical sciences as becoming more and more just an adjunct to business and industry. But that's almost secondary. He just talks about, you know, the need is to produce results, not to arrive at truth, something like that. But that's more like an absence of synoptic view among, you know, how philosophical are your physicists, something like that. But I think that that's a relatively shallow point compared to this, to the history stuff. That's why I say that the history critique is stronger. The nastiest things he says about the sort of logic stuff would be when he says that the transparency of the empty counts as clarity, right? That's where, you know, he's actually talking about what the modern logic chopping philosophy does. Yes, it's entirely clear because it's entirely empty. It's not saying anything, right? So, and the emptiness of what it is not saying gets to count as clarity. But that's the closest he gets to a critique of that side of it. In the case of like math, he's entirely, you know, it's a positive science. It's like the other sciences in that respect. He doesn't really just differentiate it from the other exact sciences. He even claims that the essential thing about modern science is that it has a prior systematic mathematical model or founding. It is mathematical to the roots, and it's not that it's experimental that makes it new. And I think that he's just right about that. There's some people in his time who weren't, but he's just right about that. That the, you know, the Galileo and to you know, Descartes sort of revolution is a Platonizing and mathematizing move, not a empirical and, you know, experimentalist move. But and he's I think he's just right about that. But I don't even, that's not original to him. Other people have noticed that as well. But the thing which I think is original to him is this critique of modern historiography as a systematic avoidance of history. And I want to come back to that, but I got multiple comments first. So before we come back to the history part, Dan.
Yeah, going back to this like exact science versus humanistic science. So like kind of going back to the distinction from being in time, like we have beings like present at head, ready of end, and then doesn't like beings. And I think Heidegger makes the case that for present at hand, logic and objective science and this mathematical projection kind of makes sense, and it's kind of the proper, not exactly the ideal, but it works. Its approach is being from that direction. The logic it's kind of goes with that, and everything, this again mathematical projection goes with that. But these days, and I see that a lot, like people are, because that works now, they want to take that and apply to human, like doesn't like beings, like human history and so on. And that when they do that, it's something, it's fundamentally is wrong there, because the object is no longer appropriate to the method at all. And I think it's one thing that Heidegger, I think, is going back over and over, and with
So, I mean,
reasons.
I think not mathematizing human sciences, plenty of people agree with Heidegger on that, you know, and including plenty of modern, you know, modern method people in that, and, you know, Aristotle for that matter, you know, in the beginning of the Ethics, right? So that the don't over mathematize the human sciences. He's, you know, certainly in his own day on sound ground. There's plenty of, you know, German academic, you know, historians and social scientists who will agree with him entirely on that, right? You know, Weber doesn't want to make his method purely mathematical or whatever. But again, this is not the same critique he's making here. He's making the critique here that historiography, as practiced, only catalogs what has happened, and it catalogs what has happened with what is most accessible to everyone, most understandable to everyone, and gives a view of the past that is coming entirely from contemporary history. And as contemporary history moves around, it just redoes everything from the past from the new standpoint. But as it's doing that, the one thing that it studiously avoids in the past is what Heidegger calls real history. And what does he mean by the real history that is studiously avoiding? The things which are unique. That's what he means, right? Right. This is on page 120, 121, basically. The claim here, historiology always understood in its claim to possess the character of modern science, is a constant avoidance of history. Right. What is carried out is called historical thinking. Historical thinker is different from the historiologist. Historical thinkers have the center of the meditation and presentation, in each case, some specific domain: poetry, sculpture, founding, guiding a state, whatever, other creativity, decisions, and peaks and valleys within history. the point being there, the actual history is about the unique occurrence. It's the internally understood action of the major actors in that history, so to speak, as individual unique occurrences. And why is that a problem for modern historiography? Because modern historiography still has the notions of truth that it gets from Cartesian rationalism, where something is true if it's part of a general rule, right? You're supposed to find general laws for everything. You're supposed to find the general rules that apply to everything, so that all of the individual cases only count as data for the general rule that you're trying to formulate. And it doesn't even rise to the level of being a science if all you're doing is collecting the individual observations. Now you're just Linnaeus, right? You have to come up with the universal rule that says, all societies, above this level of technological development that have this innovation, then have this subsequent, right, unfolding, right? Because you need to have a causal theory of it has to be a causal theory, or it's not science, and it has to be a general rule, or it's not science. So looking for causal general rules is what historiography is going to do, and for the rest, all it's going to do is collect the things that happened. But that is exactly not going to see what is unique about each of the actual happenings. It's got a relationship to the truth likeness and the time likeness of historical events, which is backwards from Heidegger's point of view, right? That's why he calls it the avoidance of history, right? Josh?
Yeah. I always understood that his critique of the basis of the natural sciences in mathematics and mathematical logic is that to him, every change of degree is at the same time a change in kind. And it's only on the basis of a derivative abstraction that we place over this continually morphing and changing experience of our world abstractions. We place presences over them that sit still long enough for us to be able to manipulate them and assign correctness of truth. And the reason that he rejects the notion of truth as correctness is that he thinks that, well, yes, I mean, nobody denies, and he certainly doesn't deny the usefulness of mathematics and of physics. That's the reason he calls physics not a he doesn't focus on it in terms of theory. To him, it's a kind of a technical method. The whole enterprise is a technical method because it's not aware of its own presuppositions. It's locked into those presuppositions as long as it defines its subject matter in terms of the empirically objective and defines the empirically objective in terms of objects that remain self-identical. You need to have self-identity, it seems to me, in order to justify the edifice of mathematics and logical, in order to manipulate these self-identical objects, even if they're only temporarily self-identical, even if they're only self-identical for a fraction of a second. As long as that's your starting point, you're not delving deep enough into the historical origins and the philosophical origins and the genesis of that thinking. It's a starting point that doesn't realize its own basis. That's his critique.
So I disagree with this. I think that so much of that critique you just enunciated is not Heidegger's critique. I think a lot of that is Nietzsche's critique of conceptual use of mathematics and treating of it as a kind of error that we use to approximate when we throw our concept nets over things. I happen to also think that as a matter of just fact about physics, it's wrong, right? That critique of Nietzsche of math in modern physics is just wrong as about matter of physics, but that's a whole other side of it. As for the not aware of own presuppositions, none of the sciences from Heidegger's point of view are aware of their metaphysical suppositions, although some of the scientists in them certainly are. Some of them are quite sophisticated about it, but I don't think that changes anything about the nature of modern scientific enterprise. Modern science is mathematical because the prior projection of the mathematical basis behind the world is the basis of all of its systematizing. And yes, that's needed for systematic thinking, application of its logical machinery, application of mathematics, what it's describing, it also works more than it would work if it was just the math. And it does that for reasons which are, empirically ascertainable. It's not a metaphysical error. But I'm saying that because I'm way more of a Platonist than Heidegger or Nietzsche was on this point. But I honestly don't think that there is any coherent critique of math and modern science in this section. And I don't know if there's any coherent critiques of the use of math in modern science, especially modern physical science, in Heidegger. But I do think that there is a definite criticism of the nature of modern historiography in Heidegger, and that's much closer to what his philosophy in this other beginning is actually about. He's not going to revolutionize physics with a new notion of time based upon time space, and that's not going to revolutionize elementary particle mechanics, something like that. Anyone expecting that to be the way that this issue is not thinking about it clearly, in my opinion. But I want to give you a chance to react to anything I'm saying, Josh.
Yeah, I don't know where it is in this book, but and I have to apologize. I wrote it down from a different translation. But he writes, in philosophy, propositions never get firmed up into a proof. This is the case not only because there are no top propositions from which others could be deduced, but because here what is true is not a proposition at all, and also not simply that about which a proposition makes a statement. All proof presupposes that the one who understands as he comes via representation before the content of a proposition remains unchanged as he enacts the interconnection of representations for the sake of proof. And only the result of the deduced proof can demand a changed way of representing, or rather, a representing of what was unnoticed up until now. By contrast, in philosophical knowing, a transportation of the man who understands take place with the very first step, not in a moral existential sense, but rather with design as measure. I'll stop there. But that's kind of what I was getting at.
It's certainly the case that philosophical insight is meant to change the reasoner, and this is something which has in common with lots of other things. But again, I don't think this has anything to do with math in physics. Just doesn't. So, yeah. Dan.
Yeah, going back to your. It seems to me that Heidegger is using this kind of distinction historiography. So whatever is not connected with this story of being, the way he tells it to him is not history. It's at least that's my impression.
I mean, largely true, but I mean, things that happen in meaningful art still count for him as history, and he doesn't think that they're, even if they're not about the philosophy of being, right? That people don't have to be doing ontology, right? For what they're doing to be disclosive of meaning in the being sense. So and he mentions other examples here of things that historians care about that are very far from the philosophical. I don't disagree with you that when he's talking about thinking with a capital T or history with a capital H, he's thinking of the history of the revealing of the truth of being, right? That's his standard, what he means by history with a capital H. But the critique of historiography systematically avoiding history here is more pointed than that. He's claiming that they don't have the right sense of truth for their subject matter. He claims that he claims that they are necessarily distorting of the nature of their subject matter because they are using a borrowed sense of truth that was created and is appropriate for other areas of existence, but is not appropriate to history, and that they ought to be more independent in that respect, and they should have a notion of what counts as real in history and is important in history that is intrinsic to the matter itself, so to speak. And that includes the things which happen once. It includes the essential decisions. It includes things which are not reproducible. It doesn't have any demands put upon it that it has to be stated in terms of a general rule, that it has to subsume all particular cases under a general rule as data under laws, right? There is no requirement that history be systematic positivistic science in that sense in order to be history, because that's not how history actually happens. History actually happens as individual events with individual consciousnesses that make differences in what happens afterwards, right? Independent of any prior scheme of any causal laws thrown over it. He even says at times that those, the attempt to find those in all the cases for all the human beings is an attempt to make the people into machines. They're trying to make men into calculable machines, and history is the place where that works least well, right? When you're dealing with, to be Kantian about it, when you're dealing with free moral agents, right, the idea that they're factory products operating according to universal laws is going to fall apart on you, right? They're not. And especially if the kind of events that are happening in them is, at this point in time, because of an essential occurrence in the history of being, an entirely new foundation of Western philosophy occurred, right? It's going to look to you like a revolution you never saw coming, right? So in that sense, he is committed to the proposition that the history that matters is radically more unpredictable than any positivist historiographer would ever admit.
I think this goes back to like way back to, like, for example, Wittgenstein said that truths are kind of small bits that we collect them, and then from time to time we rearrange them, and Heidegger is going against that. It says it's not that, it's as you say, it's unique. It goes across all this, and it's not rearranging pieces. It's something more fundamental, and even more these days we are overwhelmed by all these bits, and we don't know what to do with them. There are so many, and Heidegger said that's beside the point. The true history, it's very simple and unique.
Yes, on the bits part, but it's not just the bits. I mean, Heidegger has other critiques of what happens as soon as people start thinking of the historiographic happenings as being things which are raw material as collected bits subsumed under those laws, right? Instead of as unique historical happenings, so to speak. Other things happen to them. The method of historiography becomes journalism. That's one. And they become radically subordinatable to any power dynamic that comes along, right? He talks repeatedly about how it's perfectly natural that a social science where this is its method would subordinate itself to any demand from politics or the state that comes along, or from the economy that comes along, because it views truth itself as purely instrumental to begin with. So why would it object to being treated purely instrumentally itself, right? So the predictive calculative social science is of course going to be predicted and calculated. Is going to be predicted with and calculated with by all of the political activists that are going to use it for whatever purposes they put it to, which are going to be power machination power games and at the level of journalism, right? And he even says places that this will turn into events being transcribed as journalistic happenings as soon as possible, and then published as rapidly as possible in a medium most accessible to the most number of people, etc. He basically is predicting that the social sciences are going to become Twitter and TikTok, right? And is he wrong, right, Josh? Josh, can't tell if your hand is still up or if you have another thought on what we're saying. He doesn't come back. I'm gonna assume his hand is just still up. Okay. Obviously, the science stuff was a little bit more contentious. We talked about the resonating. I think we already talked about the plight. I want to talk about the three refusals. So he says that he describes the resonating as the abandonment of beings by being, and he calls this a refusal. And he's always very cagey about who is refusing what, right? At first order, the refusal is the refusal of being to appear to man. The agency is on the side of abstract being, and the refusal is being refuses to talk to man because they're not on speaking terms, right? And that's sort of the immediate surface meaning of refusal here. But we can read into that from other things we know about, his psychology, anthropology, whatever you want to call it, is existentialism. What does that refusing to talk to man actually look like on the ground with Dasein, right? It looks like individual human beings who don't read Nietzsche because they think that Nietzsche is dangerous. It's the he mentions that Nietzsche's diagnosis of nihilism has not been confronted or meditated upon. It has been a sign of the cross has been made to ward it off as demonic or as diabolical, right? And the thought behind that is, if that were true, something bad would happen, right? And people don't see in that the nihilism, because the nihilism is if that were true, it would be bad. Therefore, it cannot be true. Therefore, I won't look at it, right? And Heidegger's point is that that's the nihilism, right? Because that's where you've given up any pretense of being concerned about the truth. You're just concerned with your safety, and you're not going to look at anything that might be true because for fear that it might disturb your quiet life, right? And that's the thrown over any curiosity about the world, nihilism, he says. But I'm getting at what the refusal is. The refusal is the refusal to pay attention, the refusal to read the challenging thinkers, the refusal to assign a meaning to being and make a decision, right? He gives several examples along the way, some of them politically naive ones, but examples along the way of the straddles people go through. They don't want to decide what this means, so they'll just say it could mean this or it could mean that. They'll leave it ambiguous because that way, there's a formula that we can all more or less agree upon because it's a muddle, right? But if you made a clear decision on it, then you'd alienate half the population or something like that. So you don't make a clear decision. The diplomatic thing is to leave it a muddle, right? And he's very much against this. But that's the refusal as well. It's the refusal to make essential decisions, the refusal to have intellectual clarity about what you mean, right? Okay. It is the refusal that is frustrating him here of people reading everything and being in time as just about anthropology, which is an interesting cultural psychology. That's what he says about Nietzsche. And therefore, it's it might be true, but it's only true about a subjective world experience over there in a box. We can keep doing all of our science over here. Our notion of truth doesn't have to be disturbed. We can just have everything Heidegger says be only interesting psychological insights about the purely subjective pole of existence, and we just ignore the rest of the challenge. That's the refusal, right? So the second version of the refusal is not a being appearing thing. It's a whole bunch of contemporaries being intellectually lazy in a way that lets things just drift, if you get me. Okay.
Jason, can I ask real quick as well? Do you think,
Sure.
Maybe I'm reading into things that aren't there, but this notion of the refusal seems closely related to Heidegger's notions of concealment as well. And that almost seems to be like a kind of a structural item as Heidegger understands it. Do you think that the refusal is somehow necessary on Heidegger's understanding?
It's a good question. I mean, so the concealment is more structurally necessary, more obviously more structurally necessary. It's part of the structure of aletheia, something like that. But he thinks it's something that ought to be visible, right? The structure of concealment, including the fact that something is concealed, ought to be visible in aletheia itself, something like that. So it's if it hides, it has a tendency to hide on its own, but that it stays hidden is still the result of a kind of inattention, not just its own thing. Is this refusal here purely its own thing? He's treating it as fated, but he's got this weird sense of the fate of these things, right? He treats it as a fated consequence of the unthought in the first beginning. So in terms of his own formula for how he thinks of it as happening, it's something like that. Does that mean he thinks that there is a necessity of, Plato or Aristotle couldn't have thought one of these unthoughts and brought us to a different place instead of the particular place, so we went with the particular unthoughts that they had? I don't think there's any such claim, right? He's not claiming anything necessary or fated about those decisions. He is claiming that they're decisions. They happened. They took us on a path. We're down that path. Something like that.
Oh yeah. So again, to the extent that he might be viewing it as a kind of a fate or a necessity in a way, he's viewing that in a very different way than. Yeah, I see what you're saying. Sort of a yeah.
He
Wait.
even thinks of this notion of fate as being more important than good and bad or good and evil.
Yeah. Yeah.
He says this. It's one passage in our. Trying to see if I can find it. He talks about see if I can find it. The crux of it is this is the kind of thing where it matters more that this happened than whether or not this happening is good or bad, something like that. And right, here we go. It's page 89, the plight, last paragraph. When at issue is that to which we belong, that toward which we are hiddenly compelled, then what about plight? That which compels and is retained without being grasped, essentially surpasses all progress, for that which compels is itself what is genuinely to come, and thus resides completely outside of the distinction between good and evil, and withdraws itself from all calculation.
Yeah, I noticed that passage as well. That was an interesting one.
The point of this is that something which is fated to come, something that is actually our destined future, is our destined future, whether we like it or not. It's not up to our calculation. It doesn't matter whether we judge it as good or bad. It is our fate that is happening to us. And he has a sense of belonging to that is more a part of his identity than good or evil are. Right? He wants to live in the real world. The real world is the world that's going to actually happen. The fact that it is the world that actually happens is more important than whether or not you like it or dislike it, or whether or not it's good or evil. It's real, it's actual. And his allegiance to that future semi-fated is like his allegiance to truth. It's not like his allegiance to good. Right? That's the thing he's getting at here. And he has senses of historical, it's not even necessity, historical happening, destiny, future time-likeness coming towards us, right? That are like that. And similar things he says at other places he's talking about people who are trying to save what already exists in that respect. They are just avoiding all the essential decisions, right? So he has a sense that some of these decisions are it's unavoidable that we'll make them. He's not saying it has to be made this way, it has to be made that way. He's saying we cannot avoid making them. And people who are just trying to save what was in the past by blocking any decision being made in the process are just standing in the way of what has to be. Right? This reminds me of passages in Nietzsche where he says, "No one is free to be a crab. You can't go back to some old ideal in the distant past." Right? You get the same kind of take in Heidegger. Dismissive of the pure antiquarian conservative who just wants to keep things from changing, something like that, right?
Yeah.
I have a quick question along these lines.
Sure.
Just a clarifying one, not to interrupt, sorry.
No, please.
Sounds a little bit like the whole hero's journey where the refusal of the call is happening on a metaphysical scale. But the thing I wonder about, is that if we're looking at the journey we've been on from Plato and Aristotle, we'd be in the innermost cave at this point because we're grappling with the nihilism. So I don't know which one it is. Either Heidegger's right that we've started a new phase in metaphysical history, or we're in the innermost cave trying to get ready for that, battle with or confrontation with the goddess. I don't know. But it seems to me like more like a refusal of a call.
So you're absolutely right that he's using those same terms, metaphors, stages, absolutely. And he's when he's talking about this resonating, that's definitely the predicament stage. The interplay is just the sense of reaction to the other beginning, where it's first dawning that another thing is possible. The leap section is going to take us into, what would it take to transform out of, we're not there yet, but it's not very far off, 2 sections, right? He's going to be talking about the leap, and then he's going to be talking about exactly the sorts of possible transformation. So you're absolutely right to put this in the context of sort of hero's journey kinds of stories about there is a history / career / salvation drama of human metaphysics, something like that, of philosophical thinking, and in that the groping towards the other beginning is the redemption arc out of the underworld, right? Absolutely. Does that make sense?
Oh yeah, I just wanted to make sure I wasn't
You're not making, yeah, you're not
misapplying.
dreaming that up. You're not making that up, right? So the section I was thinking about, the it's on 121, top of the right. He's just brought up Christian historical apologetics. Standing in service to apologetics today are already all non-Christians who are concerned completely and only with saving the heretofore, i.e. with hindering essential decisions. So, and he's immediately contrasts that with the genuine historical. So this, you get this same notion that the major change fated to come, thoughtfully confronted is needful, something like that. And that needfulness is before, if not beyond, good and evil, something like that, right? It's part of allegiance to truth, not part of allegiance to good. Heidegger's point of view. You're either living in the world that is actual, or you're stuck in a fantasy, and the fantasies aren't real, is the underlying thought there. But again, there is this, I could say, very German and very German idealist sense of this destiny business. Okay.
So it seems like the refusal it's sort of a double refusal. It's on the part of being,
yes,
and on the part of man, sort of refusing the call.
and yes, and on man's part in 2 ways. One, on the historical level of the individual people not listening to the thinkers who are pointing them in the right direction, and not understanding them, but also on the level of the individual thinker who refuses the call or doesn't sense the presence, or whatever you want to call it, right? He makes a remark there at one point where he says, someone being completely lacking in presentiment presents this as an overcoming of the tradition, right? In other words, you can plead the fact that you have no prophetic bones in your body, that you are more rational than all the prophets, right? That's the sort of claim there.
And that puts you in a position where you don't even have mentors, because the philosophers are supposed to be the mentor that helps the person coming out of that refuses the call, and they're waiting there before the herald to the underworld to be a mentor and to be alongside humanity.
Yes, the replacement mentor.
But they're not even.
In the other version, the replacement mentor becomes the positivist debunker who gets rid of the misty in the mystagogues. But yeah, I'm not saying there aren't replacements for it there, but yes, there's at least 3 refusals. There's the refusal of being to appear to man. There's the refusal of the individual man to respond to the call or to truthfully transcribe what actually happens to him in the call. That's the other way that happens. You only talk about the effects and you don't talk about why it happened. And the third is this broader refusal to look and think because it might interfere with the quiet life that you get from people warding off Nietzsche with the sign of the cross as diabolic because there's something bad might happen if that were true, right? Right. Okay. We talked a little about the producer. I want to talk a little bit more about the producer. Machination is all about the idea that the producer rules the produced. He mentions this on 104. He says, machination is as the sovereignty of making in the realm of what is made. And he connects it with the ans creatum. And he says that the step taken by Descartes is already first consequence, the decisive one, the effective one, whereby machination comes into sovereignty as transformed truth, correctness as certainty. Two things there. The first is that although there are, elements of machination / power thinking back in, back in the Greeks or back in Plato's sophist, I would also say you can find them there in people like, who am I thinking of? Jewish philosopher of Alexandria, 1st century BC. Anyway, the point is there's things in the Hellenic world that are that where you can say there's versions of this, and you can find examples of this sort of thinking about nature in some of the Neoplatonists of the Middle Ages. I'm thinking of Scotus Erigena and his notion of nature as just the web of the powers that something has, something like this. But all of that is preliminary, and Heidegger is saying here it's Descartes that takes the decisive step, the effective one, that makes something like machinational essence the essence of the beings as they appear. But the point that I'm trying to make here is this is about the sovereignty of making in the realm of the made. So the notion that the things that are the made things and the made things are ruled by their makers, that's something you also find in the German idealist tradition. You find it in Fichte and Hegel, where the making involved is also the ego's model of the thing, right? The ego's model of how the thing works. Once the ego is actually correct, it is how the thing actually works, right? And the objective truth is the subjective truth. Once the subject has understood the external reality, at that point it's internalized the external reality. At that point, is it not obeying a foreign being, but is obeying only itself, right? So the ideal of self-consciousness in people like Fichte and Hegel is the idea that being first starts off as the non-ego, the non-man, the inhuman that is restricting man's freedom and restricting man's power, but that by learning to incorporate whatever necessities or restrictions there are in objective reality, these are made into things which are only there because man wills them. Man wills them as understanding them as the truth. So this is the sense in which man becomes rational and becomes free and becomes powerful over nature by understanding nature enough to control it. Something like that. That's the notion of the mankind being freed from the tutelage or leading strings of nature that you get in the Fichte's and Hegel's of the world. Why does this matter? It's the same as saying that man being free and man having power over nature are the same as turning the thing that you're interacting with into only your concept of it, your projection concept of it. So if you have an adequate projected concept of it that allows you to fully control, manipulate it, you have mastered it. You have brought it into the realm of the human, out of the realm of the seemingly alien. And from Hegel's point of view, that means you've taken it out of the realm of being and put it into the realm of self. Dan?
Yeah, I was going to say go ahead, Dan.
Go ahead. No, Christian, go ahead.
I was just going to make a quick comment that in Hegel, it's very sort of upfront in his philosophy that, truth is a matter of overcoming error. And it does seem to be almost even in Kant to some extent, you get this almost equation between freedom and power equals truth. That those two things, you have the true when you can absorb it and manipulate it, and it's no longer something alien and outside of you.
Dan?
Yeah, I wanted to kind of the same, that this trajectory, it started kind of with the Greeks, and then as you mentioned previously with Aristotle, with the pre-mover, the cause of all things, and then Christianity took that, and everything, all the beings are God created. And then he's saying that the inflection is Descartes with his approach to certainty. They are still created by God, but the major inflection there is by adding this understanding of truth and certainty. And then modernity move in that direction. It drops God, but still keeps, then it's man put there in place of God and still keeps certainty. And that's kind of the big structure of this machination and beings that's created.
Yeah, so multiple steps along there that matter. I mean, in the case of the medievals, it's still it's not human. It's maybe made, but it's made by an entity. It's made by a being which is necessary being rather than created being, something like that. And it's fair to say that Heidegger sometimes gives the medievals and the Avicennas of the world short shrift in their understanding of being and all that. But we could leave that aside for a second. With Descartes, the certainty move is precisely to turn the subjective stuff into something where you do not try to judge what is the case, but only how it appears to you. And about that, you can have certainty. So it's a pulling in of the ambition of the truth claim in order to arrive at certainty, but it means abandoning the hope, claim, or desire to be truthful about the things themselves as opposed to their appearance to you. Certainly for all the subjective or qualia parts, and for all of the objective parts, you're going to arrive at that by this, factoring process of what everybody agrees upon and whatever the primary qualities are. So the point is that that move is the stripping out of the how to put it. You're no longer relying upon intellectual intuition to individually reach the truth from Descartes on. That's the way I would put it. And that is thought of as a piece of hubris, as a place where you're judging with where you cannot be certain, and you should be skeptical about that instead, something like that in Descartes. But the extra thing you get in the German idealist, I'm thinking of Fichte in particular, is the notion of being as that which resists the will, and the will taking over everything, or the will becoming everything, is the same as being able to assimilate the pieces of reality that resist the will. And that assimilation takes the form of creating a projected conceptual understanding of them that is sufficiently true for all your practical purposes that you know what you have to conform to about them, so to speak. You're not denying that they're objectively true, those truths constrain you, but if they are precisely objective truths now, they are truths about which you have true concepts, right? You have a vertical understanding of them. You've internalized that constraint on you, and now it's part of what you will, that you will to only use the means that nature gives you, so to speak, right? But that changes the infant desiring will into the adult targeted will, which uses the laws of nature and their manipulation to achieve what the will wants, instead of just trying to defy the law of nature with the infant's will. But that process is in the Fichtes and Hegels of the world meant to be how the becoming self-conscious and becoming rational mind or ego rises to truth on the one hand, and also assimilates everything that was previously being and therefore thought of as outside of the ego into the ego, right? So from Heidegger's point of view, saying that nothing is happening to being, saying that being is disappearing, and saying that man has become all-powerful, he regards everything as possible, are equivalent. They're the same as saying we're all becoming Fichtians.
So
right?
do you think that Heidegger would actually see Kant maybe in a more favorable light in this regard? Because while yes, in some sense, Kant is like the paradigm of taking that Cartesian model of it is the subject who sort of produces the object. Kant is still committed to this gulf of we're only talking about truths of things as they appear, and he doesn't even want to talk about the thing in itself. Do you think that Heidegger would see that as being sort of less guilty of this machination than maybe somebody like Fichte or Hegel?
I don't think I think he does have a higher opinion of Kant, but not for that reason, because the pulling in of your truth claim horns in order to avoid the possibility of being wrong about something.
Yeah.
Well, but you're doing it to avoid the possibility of being wrong, and therefore you're trying to attain a certainty through a process of skepticism. That is the Cartesian move from Heidegger's point of view, and he's critical of it as abandoning the concern for truth. The place where Kant actually still does have the concern for truth from Heidegger's point of view is the fact that he does allow things like transcendental deductions. He doesn't allow things like the the whole realm of morals independent of the phenomena, etc. So from Heidegger's point of view, Kant is trying to keep a connection to truth that is more so there than you get in Descartes, certainly more so than you get in the Fichte and Hegel's after him. But to the extent that he is just doing the, oh, I'm not trying to talk about the thing itself, I'm only talking about the phenomena move, that's what he's critical of. That's not the one he's not endorsing that. From Heidegger's point of view, you should be trying to make claims about what is actually true and sticking your neck out and communicating with being. And you'd be much closer to a Popperian in that regard. You know, don't make your truth claims so limited that they cannot be wrong, or you won't make contact with reality. But he does have a higher opinion.
I knew
Kant
certainly that.
Sorry.
I was just going to say, I knew certainly that Heidegger wouldn't have agreed with that claim.
Yes.
But I just, yeah, it's interesting because somehow it seems like a little bit less machinational than the other way of thinking, I guess.
Yes.
And that Kant is sort of willing to let the thing in itself stand on its own.
The problem is that, I mean, the thing in itself in Kant is not that, from Heidegger's point of view, not that useful. It's not really a limitation of claim, right? The places where he is trying to be closer to immediate intuition of truth is the places where he's talking about things like the intuitions of space and time as necessary forms of the intuition. The places where he's saying transcendental deduction allows us to arrive at some actual truth outside of these mere experiences, or some aspect of this has to be the way things actually are, which is an attempt to reach truth through this structural move, so to speak, condition of possibilities move. But it's trying to reach something which you can claim is, you know, absolutely actually true, not just an appearance. So Kant is not a appearance skeptic in that sense. And similarly, he will make similar claims for, you know, morals and aesthetics in the second and third critiques. But those are the places in which Heidegger is probably more inclined to be sympathetic to Kant on those points, so to speak. He obviously also learned a ton from Kant and in the whole conditions of a possibility move, right? That's hugely influential for both Husserl and Heidegger in Being and Time and so on.
Sure. Yeah.
But
yeah, I just was like, it just washed over me that I had never thought about it this way before, but that seemed to be exhibiting maybe a kind of restraint in Kant that seems.
The thing is, you get almost explicitly this. You get an almost explicitly parallel constraint in Descartes that Heidegger is, you know, relentlessly critical of. Right. The certainty move in Descartes is precisely, if you cannot be sure that your judgment about the qualia is the truth about the actual wax, then the right thing to do is to pull in your horns and only make claims about how the wax appears to you. And as soon as you do that, you can be certain. And that's very much the only talking about your experiences move. And that's, from Heidegger's point of view, the invention of certainty. And it's the invention of certainty as I'm only, everything that's qualia-like, I'm only going to talk about, I'm only going to give you honest testimony about my experience. I'm not going to make a truth claim that actually tries to be about the external world. And from Heidegger's point of view, that's when the attempt to understand truth by actual direct intuition of it is abandoned.
Yeah. So it's just as guilty of the sort of power machination as anything.
The whole reason it's doing it is to avoid the possibility of error in order to build something firm and constant in the sciences, to build a more useful, you know, tower, so to speak.
Yeah.
So it is not what counts as not machinational for Heidegger is attempts to reach truth in an exposed and vulnerable way, not just
blockading yourself off
That's
against
right.
That's
right.
Gotcha.
Limitation of truth claims never counts as openness to Heidegger.
Yeah, good. That's helpful.
Yeah, that's fair. That's a temperamental thing that's all through him. Okay. I think I've mostly gotten through the points I wanted to.
Can I
please,
jump back
Dan.
to something that I think
Absolutely.
I kind of resonating with Isabel, and it's probably we already skipped it, this bewitchery stuff. And then
okay, yes.
to me, like that kind of bewitchery is kind of a cheap version of a enchantment, and of course enchantment is kind of a cheap version of being face to face, like amazement in front of beings. And this bewitchery section here reminded me of, like, for example, that quote from Clark, who said that any sufficient advanced
Yes.
technology is indistinguishable from magic. So it's kind of the modern world is trying to pull this kind of on us, like this kind of cheap re-enchantment. And this bewitchery section, it seems to me, is going in that direction.
So, I mean, I understand what you're saying, but I don't think he's even particularly calling it magical. I mean, he's trying to say, what am I trying to say? He's reversing, it's reversal. It's classic rhetorical reversal of, I'm not the one re-enchanting the world. You're the one who's bewitching everyone to think that the world of the merely technological is the whole world when it's not, because truth is missing, right? That's the kind of move he's making here. But he's saying it's technology which is casting the hex on folks, where hex is to be caught in illusions. But if you ask, very end of the passage, what's the actual dislike of the bewitchery? The constant raising of the average level and the concurrent widening and wide approximation of this level until it becomes the platform for all activity constitutes the most uncanny sign of the vanishing of the decisive places. It is the sign of the abandonment by being. He's worried about the decisive places disappearing. What is decisive places? Decisive places is places where decisions are made. Who is making the decisions? The thinkers, philosophers, and et cetera, thought leaders who are determining the future of man's relation to being, determining the future of thought, exercising spiritual authority. Those positions are disappearing, and that's the sign of the abandonment by being, right? So the objection is only secondarily to the bewitchery. It is first of all to the leveling and the fact that the places for the decisive thinkers are disappearing. Josh, then Pete. Josh?
Yeah. How would one, in your opinion, how would Heidegger argue for the method by which we distinguish between truth and falsity, given that we are removing predetermined schemes from the equation, or predetermined presuppositions from the equation here, and we are simply trying to directly relate to, qualia as they appear to us? Because just to finish that off, because again, there's a bit of tension here between your interpretation of mine and mine, which is fine.
Sure.
I like.
No, you're up. It's absolutely fair.
So well, I mean, just to finish up that thought. So again, in my reading, there isn't, his notion of truth doesn't involve a distinction of truth versus falsity, because it's not about truth as correctness, or as comparison, or as mirroring, or as coherence. It's truth simply as what discloses itself. And so,
Truth is definitely what discloses. Covered over is more of its opposite than falsity is. But covered over certainly happens, and the closed down certainly happens, and that's what he's describing here as the closed down of this bewitchery. But the answer to your direct question, right? What becomes the criteria of the truthfulness of appearing when you're talking about this kind of event-like happening? The answer is that it is only the direct intellectual intuition of going there yourself and recapitulating the experience, going over the way the thinker has gone over before. And the only thing that can attest to that is, the richness of the interpretation that comes from it and the shareability of that, the insight that it gives to the person coming after. There is no assurance. It is thinking exposedly. There is no method that ensures that no error can creep into this. It is not meant to be the trustworthy method that has no chinks in the armor. It is an exposed appeal to direct intellectual intuition and to having the experience yourself. That's what we saw in all the thoughtful memory stuff in this one. So yes, that is a matter of original appearing, but is the original appearing that you're told by a thinker how it originally appeared to him? You have to look yourself and see if it actually is that way, right? You have to judge yourself whether or not it is that way. There's no substitute for going there yourself from Heidegger's point of view. Does that help?
When you say you have to go there yourself, so you're going there and you're what are the what's the terrain there of possibilities that that from which belongs the ascertainment of truth? What else is part of that exercise of going there, other than simply disclosing? What else could one do besides disclose once one has gone there?
Well, I mean, the issue with another thinker's thoughts, another thinker's thoughtful sayings, and whether or not you can see truth in them, whether or not you can reappropriate them, go over that ground again. You could do that even if when you go to that ground, you find something slightly different, right? You would, when I read Heraclitus, I don't see everything the same way Heraclitus saw it, clearly, but I can see what he was seeing, right? When I say I can see what he's seeing, I'm not claiming any perfection in that process, right? I'm just saying that he speaks to me, right? And for the rest of it, it's a matter of the thing being thought being in charge of the disclosing, right? So the past thinker's sayings are not in charge, and my will in the matter is not in charge. What is the case is in charge. But again, this is the dialogue of thoughtful thinkers with one another and how they try to communicate with each other. It's what thoughtful saying tries to do. But in all of it, there is an intellectual conscientiousness about it, where the controlling is all from the inherent requirements coming from the experience itself, right? There's an inherent normativity to being in any kind of attuned communication with being, in which being or the truth is in charge and you're not. And where that's missing, what results is distortion, right? It's entirely possible for it to be missing.
Would this be consistent at all with the distinction between, say, unreflectively engaged coping versus representational conceptualization and representationalism? That distinction has been made. Well, it's been made in different.
Sure. The representational, the point about representational and correctness is that there is an attempt to avoid the necessities of the difficulties of intellectual intuition that I was just describing and the uncontrolled nature of it by trying to create a doctrine of what counts as truth that can live in the language independent of the experience. So if you try to make a doctrine that can let the truth live in the, in the semantic meaning of the sets of words that are put down on the page or something, then you're going to create something where that's now reproducible. That's now something a machine could potentially understand, and that communicable meaning then being seen as the correct finding or the correct transmittable truth becomes something that a person who never goes there and never sees the experience themselves can still verify by checking logical rules of entailment and so forth. But that dream of getting the truth of experiences to live in the language in a way that is so locked down and rigorous that it can be transmitted to anybody is exactly what Heidegger is railing against here and claiming shuts off all access to the original experience.
Okay. Yeah, I think I understand. Okay.
These are great questions, by the way. This is the right stuff. Pete?
Yes, I wanted to ask people what they thought of section 58 on page 95. The three ways the abandonment by being cloaks itself.
Yes.
What they are and how they appear. And to ask my question, I'd like to take a step back to a couple of things that have come up. One, you, Jason, mentioned how being has withdrawn, but Heidegger's still hearing the white noise, the being is left behind. And in the previous section with releasement, that there's nothing we can do willfully to get closer to being except, let go of willfulness and wait for the call from being. And so I'm wondering if what Heidegger is saying in this section is that in calculation and speed and the massive, that new things emerge, and if we're attentive to those things emerging, we can catch being withdrawing as those things are emerging. Is that how we can see the abandonment of being cloaking itself when something emerges?
You want to ask everyone, so I'm going to let everyone else go first. I was going to go eventually to the gigantic, but I'm glad you brought this section up. So
yeah, and one comment. So that this came up in a seminar last decade, and pointed out that with speed, he says there's an increase of this as a consequence of this speed. And I was thinking that there were the increase is of the speed is an acceleration, and in the acceleration a new property will emerge. And I was kind of thinking maybe of ChatGPT, that between ChatGPT 1 and 3.5 something emerged that wasn't there before, as a consequence of calculation and speed and massive amounts of that, and that since something emerged there, we should, if we look the right way, we should be able to see being withdrawing because something's emerging from massive speed and calculation.
So I'm not sure about the GPT connection. I mean, I mean, these points on their own. First of all, he says there's 3, and then he gives you 4. I don't know if everyone else noticed that, but
he breaks. Then he gives you more than 4, but after
I'm just saying.
He then says these are a consequence of the 3, right?
Well,
and he treats the 4th as kind of like a somehow encapsulating the other 3. I think that's how I read.
It's not.
Yeah.
The making everything public and common is a 4th, right? There's just no getting around it. It's not one of the 3. But so I think that the way he intends these is ways in which you should be able to see something like withdrawing of engagement with being or meaning or truth in each of these things on their own. And yes, if you're attentive to anything essentially happening and describe it with sufficient detail and pay attention to the event-like nature in which it transpires, you can use that as an occasion to, let's put it this way, hone your skills at spotting a being or its withdrawal, and that would include in new phenomena from technology or anything else. But one of the particular things here, the way in which the obsession with speed is a withdrawal, is that it's measuring against measuring a purely quantitative attainment in a way that is increasingly meaningless. What do I mean by that? I mean that it's yes, obviously there's benefits, technological benefits to this or that being faster than it was before, and obvious ones. But the why does he call it, the monstrous form of record-breaking performances? He's saying that because it's holding out to people the notion that to ever have been the fastest X once is some world historical accomplishment, right? When this is precisely a record that will recede into the past 5 minutes later, right? It's the most ephemeral technical accomplishment, but it's being presented as the historic. It's being presented as the way in which history progresses is you set a new world record, then you set another new world record, then you set another new world record, right? And that is what progress is. Progress is each of the world records succeeding one another, being slightly faster than the previous one. And the contrast of that is with anything like an actual essential change or an essential progress. He says, he calls this blindness to the truly momentary, which is not the transient, but that which opens up eternity, right? And you don't normally hear Heidegger talking positively about eternity, but here he clearly is, right? The point is that the obsession with speed is a running away from the for all time. It is a running away with the significance isn't it happening once. It's just trying to be a little bit more than the previous, and it's treating that as the essence of historical accomplishment. And what he objects to in it is the leveling down and emptying out of what it means for something to actually be an historical accomplishment. Isabel?
It seems to me that we cannot talk about seeing the withdrawal of being. Be careful, be careful, be careful, because we fall into representation and we fall into the linear. We have to use, I think, Heidegger's vocab, which would be like we sense, we hear an echo, we are disturbed about it. But I would be careful about trying to see and trying, unless with seeing you mean, Pete, understand. And even then,
I didn't mean to be too ocular and vision.
Yeah, it's fine. I mean, I think the pre-Heideggerian preferred metaphor here is the long withdrawing roar, Matthew Arnold on Dover Beach. But the auditory is what is most used here. But my point is, he's not the only inventor of vocabularies for these things, and plenty of the other poets have given us ways of trying to hear, think, see, and speak about these things. And we're allowed to go to any of the poets that speak to us, I would say. But sorry, Dan.
Yeah, going back first to Pete's question, I think there is something like in Heidegger, and I remember reading it somewhere, not here, that there is like when something goes in that direction, there is a negative pointing away from that and looking back, and we see something, evidence of something, like we are pointing, like all these trends point to being by pointing away from it, something like that. It's a negative, like it's like the electron in the cloud chamber that leaves a trace, and
negative space. Yes.
We look there, we look backwards, and we see something like by not being there, and kind of like that. And then just going back to your previous comment when with bewitchery, and you said that constant raising of the average level, that Heidegger is going against that. And I agree with you that that's the main thing there. And that's one thing that appears in Heidegger, especially in his private, when we know, like, he goes against culture and he goes against the university. And that's pretty much, he noticed that this raising of the average level, it's the main danger there of we are no longer going back to the, like you say, we are not going back to being a design, being in touch with what we're supposed to be, what true is happening, and we get more and more artificial and more sophisticated and more away from that. And I think he saw that as one of the main danger
so I agree with you, but the other part of it that is upsetting to Heidegger is the they-ness of it. It's the measuring oneself by all of the others. It's the living in the others' eyes. A typical inauthenticity problem, right? You live your life. your life. You're only going to live your life. You're not going to live anybody else's. And the way in which you measure your life with other people's lives will not change the essential content of your life, right? And the obsession with levels, positioning, etc., is it's a sign of living in the day, right? From to speak, being in time. The thing which is striking to me about that passage, though, is that Heidegger seems to fear something himself in this, which is not just something he's seeing as other people's alienation, right? He has a fear that the decisive places will vanish.
Exactly, yeah. And what is covering, going back, like you mentioned, like we see it in German idealism, and you see in like for the Greeks, this notion of destiny is no longer, it's completely covered. We no longer see that with this averageness and with modern technology and so on. And anyway, going back, one more thing, like in his private journals and so on, we see this, and he was accused like of cultural barbarism and like leveling down the university and stuff like that. He always prefers it, going back to destroying everything is better than moving forward in this way. But yeah, that's it.
Right. I wanted to talk about the calculation point. The calculation point there, he calls it calculation as a basic disposition. And I don't know if other people caught all this. When he called about it as a basic law of comportment, the calculation basic law of comportment. What does he mean by that? Do you guys have experience of this with people in your own life to know what he's talking about there?
Or I think it's not that when you're doing math,
obviously then you can calculate.
When you're doing math, you're in that disposition of calculation, and every other understanding of being withdraws because you're engaged in the mathematical.
I don't think he's talking about just when you're, engrossed in mathematical. I mean, the calculation here he's talking about is a way in which everything being plannable, calculatable, overcomable, nothing impossible. This is a basic comportment. It's a treating the world as a calculable quantity, and every problem is just a matter of figuring out the appropriate answer to it. It's an engineering approach to being, if you get me, right? There is no freely developing change from the ground up. Nothing is incalculable. There's nothing outside of calculation. And as a basic law of comportment, it's fundamentally an attempt to be in complete control. It's an attempt to be in an isolated bubble that is a completely controlled, safe, sealed environment, and it's using mental activity just to seal the environment. That's what he's talking about. It's like mania. People have mania do this, right? I don't know if you've had the visceral experience of it with people from it's obsessive, but he's talking about something real here. It's if everything is a matter of calculation and safety, and nothing is impossible, and nothing is subject to any uncertainty, it's just a matter of calculating a little bit more. You're never at a loss. You're never in a mystery. There's never anything uncertain. There's no new experiences, right? Everything is just either a deduction that you haven't carried out yet, or you have to revise because you made some slip or mistake. But everything is a calculation. Dan?
Yeah, it happened. I read Dannett, and it's exactly the feeling that I had. It's everything is, the limits are very well like control and border, and it's like this kind of calculation and defines the ontology. Whatever is not calculable doesn't exist, and it's the rest is, and it's as you mentioned, it's almost building a stronghold and sealing itself and against everything that can falsify it or put it in, even in like slightly in discussion.
It wants to remove all mystery from the world because mystery is the source of danger. It wants to remove all wonder from the world because, what wonder is a matter of not knowing, which is less successful than knowing. You should know everything already, and if you don't, there's some place you can look it up. But everything can be calculated. There are no mysteries, and that as a basic law of comportment is like just an unwillingness to face mystery as a piece of man's existence, something like that. and it's killing of wonder in the sense of, you know, origin of philosophy stuff. So it is to Heidegger not fundamentally a philosophical attitude. It's an anti-philosophical attitude, but it's an anti-philosophical attitude that uses the tools of mental activity and reasoning. Josh?
Yeah, and this is where lived experience comes in an interesting sort of a way. And I can't help but think that his use of lived experience is, among other things, a dig against his mentor, Husserl, you know, who in his later years, apparently Husserl's adoption of the term Lebenswelt, it has been suggested that it was a response to his reading of Being in Time. But so you think, you know, in the case of Husserl, you don't in any obvious way, or at least not in any surface way, have before you an example of you know, calculative planning. It doesn't seem to be that way on the surface. And neither is that the case, for example, with Sartre. In both cases, you have notions of lived experience in which one's subjectivity is constituting the sense of meaning of perceptual experience in ways that don't seem to be restricted in particular. But then you look more closely. You look at what Heidegger is concerned about in what's implied by the notion of lived experience. For example, with Husserl, you have the structure of time consciousness that is how subjectivity has this relationship with the world. And the structure of time consciousness harbors hidden presuppositions. And that's where Heidegger will say, well, you see, calculability takes the form in lived experience of these presuppositions which already predetermine how experience presents itself to the subject. It can only present itself, you know, it's sort of you know, the game is rigged at the outset, even though the claim is made that, you know, for example, within Sartre's you know, oeuvre, that it's all about, you know, the subjective freedom, you know, but it's freedom that is already bound by or encaged within a kind of a preconception of how freedom operates.
So I can partly agree with the last part. I mean, I think that I want to separate the lived experience thing, which I do want to come back to, from this calculation point. I agree with you that the examples of the over-calculation to the point of closure to the world are not what the other existentialists are particularly most guilty of. There may be some version of it, but I don't think that it's primarily their problem. Most of them leave room for an open, so to speak. The lived experience becoming a term of slander in this stage of Heidegger I think is very much part and parcel of him feeling himself completely misunderstood in the Being in Time period. And that is, some of that is related to Husserl. It's also related to the other existentialists around him that he considered shallower than himself. Didn't think got to questions of being or raised the philosophical questions, but thought they were raising all of the anthropology questions. I'm thinking of the Schulers and the who am I thinking of? Jaspers and all that sort of, you know, crowd, right? Who are doing existentialism themselves and are, you know, fans of Being in Time as in terms of its subject matter. But they think that what they're doing is an anthropology of lived experience. And they do think that that's philosophically important and meaningful, but they're also perfectly willing to have this be something which is doing cognitive psych, is exploring the subjective pole of human experience. They're willing to fit what they're doing inside of an overall more positive scientific worldview, if you want to put it that way. They're not looking to upset any apple carts back to the Greeks, or even the early moderns, right? They're not trying to overthrow neo-Kantianism, they're not trying to overthrow Cartesianism, not trying to overthrow logical positivism, right? They're maybe quibbling with logical positivism of it doesn't have sufficient, delicatesse about the affairs of the psyche or something like that, about which the psychologists of lived experience will have more to tell us. But it's still just lived experience means it's just a something which is going to remain contained in this tamed subjective pole, and that's how it's going to live alongside and thus be unthreatening to the reigning philosophical disciplines outside of existentialism, something like that. And that Heidegger is starting to use lived experience in quotation marks as a formula for that sort of taming of what he was trying to do, right? Being in time can be made unthreatening and not programmatic anymore if you ignore all of the fundamental ontology parts and all of the Dasein as a between, not a subject parts. And if you just say, oh, this is an exposition of consciousness as the meaning, the interior seeming meaning of the subjective pole of human existence, and if you just make that move on its contents, but then try to accept them, you in a way have tamed them, and you put them back into a enlightenment and framing technological worldview. I think that's the move that he's calling here the lived experienced move. Dan?
Yeah, it's one interesting thing. Like about 2-3 years ago, I read this book. It's called The Age of Surveillance Capitalism, and it's a devastating, like a critic of technology. And the author, it's a contemporary author, and I was surprised then to see that what she proposes is live experiences instead of technology. So it's pretty much she didn't see that that's the flip coin of technology, and I was kind of like, Heidegger, it's relevant, and it was exactly to the point.
Yes, and I mean, lived experience then being trotted out as something which is an alternative is, it's wearing on its sleeve the claim that I make no truth claims for this. I'm only claiming this is what I saw. It's just my truth. It's not truth, right? It gives up all ambitions to be philosophically ambitious or programmatic or about truth with a capital T or anything like that, and it becomes just interesting material for anthropology and psychology, something like that. And Heidegger in our text again says basically the same move was done on Nietzsche, where Nietzsche was just called an interesting cultural psychology, right? So we don't have to pay attention to claims of nihilism or overthrowing of Western philosophy. We can just say he had some interesting insights about cultural psychology, and incorporate him alongside a little bit of Freud and something like that. Use him as a cultural critic, and but for the rest of it, go merrily on our way as though the actual philosophical discussions never actually happened, and there's no actual threat to any of the reigning philosophical schools or something like that. So that's that kind of dismissive move on these things which are meant to be large programmatic, philosophical upheavals, is what I take him here to be calling this the lived experience move. And it's a avoidance behavior. It's a way of not taking a claim seriously. You immunize yourself against it by granting it its psychological importance over there. He gives other examples along the way of you almost hear him talking to a physicist and having this discussion about time, and he says that at this point the physicist falls back on saying, well, time is probably just being used to talk about a different word. The same word is being used to talk about a different concept, right? Those modes of retreat, which are all about not engaging on the philosophical substance, are shot through the whole section here. And that's all part of the resonating of people don't grapple with the question of being, they run from it.
So can I throw something out there real quick and just anyone that wants to chime in, I'd love to hear any reactions. But I think there was at one point a notion of lived experience that would have been important to Heidegger, even though it's funny because I'm not sure he ever actually uses that term in Being in Time, but it gets attributed to him a lot. But that section in Being in Time where he's talking about like world historical objects or beings. And he asks that question about, well, what makes them historical? And he kind of comes to this discussion of, well, it's because they belong to the world of a historical people, and that there's really nothing about the present at hand properties that's relevant. And then it paints this picture of a sort of a clearing in the past that was there was an opening of truth that was happening for people at that time in history that's sort of no longer working for us, and that those objects don't they're not disclosing their truth to us in the same way that they were for the people at the time who were inside of it. We now look from the outside and we impose a kind of a just a representation on things, but we're not in it, and it's a truth that's sort of facile and dead for us. Is that analogous? Could I sort of, would I be wrong in taking that as like a model for, like, Heidegger thinks that somehow we're just imposing that kind of representational thinking on everything now, and that we're no longer willing to sort of live inside a happening of truth, but that we just have this desire to I mean, because that seems to be an example of something that, like, that would not be calculable in any way, and yet it was a happening of truth. Is that, am I getting close to where Heidegger's trying to go with this, or what's your reaction to that?
So, I mean, first of all, just let's take the example, right? The example is, trying to talk about, the historical artifact and the being and meaning of the historical artifact, and the claim is that, its role in their equipmental context or whatever, the way that they actually lived with it, right, is completely lost to us, but that it now, we can, when we are intuitively in touch with them as other living beings that live in the world, right, we can understand that this thing had that sort of meaningful functional significance for them. It was part of their life, it was part of their, their existence. And if we're intuitive about the history, we can potentially see some of its meaning there, right? We normally don't, though. We normally treat it as something which is merely a museum object in our environment, right? And museum objects in our environment are things that sit in glass cases and have little, placards next to them with, text explanations and so forth that are meant to be, quaint depictions of things which once, once existed or once mattered to people in the past. But that way of relating to them is nothing like what they actually were, and they wouldn't actually be historical objects if that's all they were, right?
Yeah.
A fake would work just as well, right? So if a fake would work just as well, you're not in touch with, or even trying to be in touch with, anything like the historical connection of it. You get the same thing of, is this an artifact with, particular known provenance, or is it just a copy, that sort of thing, right? But is that the same thing as the lived experience leveling? I don't think so. I think that the point that he was trying to make about the history example was, first of all, he's trying to make a point about world, right? The way in which the meaning that things have is part of the world that they're plugged into. It's part of their total context. It's not. He's distinguishing all of this from the way the scientist is expecting I'm using a caricature of a logical positivist who's not really a scientist, right? Expects all of the attributes of the being to be things which are about the being and are carted around with it, right? And being a Cartesian and a positivist, he expects the characteristics of the objects to be things which remain located in the object, and if the object moves, they move, and vice versa. And none of the historical things about an artifact have that character. They all have this, what we would say, intersubjective character. They all have this relation to a context of meaning character, and to a whole context of human beings character. And worldly objects, that whole section is trying to explain what he means by a worldly object. What makes it a worldly object is the fact that its actual being is infused with that worldliness, right? If you take the
Yes.
people away, it isn't what it is,
Yes.
right?
Yeah.
And he's trying to make the claim that there is being in that sense. There are things which have meaning that comes to them from their relation to human beings, and they are those objects, the meaning that those objects have as historical objects does not exist without Dasein, right? So he's
Yes.
he's just trying to fundamentally make the point that meaning and being are not simply positivist objective things.
Yeah, and that seems sort of related to his critique of historiography,
Yes.
right?
Yes,
Because
he's
what you
trying to
were
get,
saying earlier that we somehow have
that's
to,
right.
yeah, to get back.
He's trying to get
in
this
touch.
betweenness. He's trying to get this betweenness, and this betweenness of Dasein and meaning, right, means that the worldly things are happening in that between where the truth actually happens. And the problem that the historiographers and the positivists have is they do not know where that place is, right? They've denied the conditions, the actual conditions of possibility of that place, right? So they think that place so described, they can only hear subjective, they can only hear depends upon opinion, they can only hear, passes through the mind rather than through the thing, therefore is not real.
Yes.
Right. So
yeah.
the idea that if something has any interaction with the mind as part of its being or meaning, that makes it unreal is the thing he's objecting to there.
Good. So yeah, so do you think it would be fair to say then on some level that that might have been an early seed of the same form of criticism that he's offering here? That's maybe just developed out and expanded a little further?
I mean, I think the a lot of the people that are using the term lived experience in the way that he is objecting to here have accepted that point in being in time. They've accepted that there is a sphere of meanings that depends upon humanness, right, and on being embedded in a human world. They just still think of that whole area as not being where truth happens. They think of it as a place where opinion happens.
It's just subjective. Yeah.
Well, they're factoring the world into the objective truth over here about which there is agreement in science, and the subjective pole of opinion over here, which passes through minds and passes through imaginations. And if I think about it differently, it's different.
Yeah.
Right. So what's the Philip K. Dick's definition of reality? The thing which is still there even if you don't think about it, right? So they think that if I have to think about it for it to be real, it's imaginary, and if I imagine differently, it would be different. I could change it with the power of my mind, right? So, and if that's their model of anything that passes through world in Heidegger's sense, which isn't true, by the way, they couldn't think about it differently, but they think about it that way, they don't actually have room for a category of truth that includes things like that. That whole sphere has to live to them in the category of opinion.
Whereas for Heidegger, that is a happening of truth.
Absolutely.
Exactly to the contrary. Yeah.
All truth that happens in the between with human beings as part of the equation.
Yeah.
So
Dasein, yeah.
Dasein, right. Dasein as a between where being meaning appears, right? That's where truth happens of everything, including all the scientific truths, right? But as a result, there can be no downplaying of that sphere as not being truth, right? Truth, that's the kind of place where truth lives.
Yeah.
But the move that's being denounced here as lived experience is an attempt to tame the claim that the worldly includes true things by granting the contents of the claims made about that area while still keeping that whole area in the imaginary box.
Gotcha. And I think that's a big part of the reason why he's putting the quotes around the word lived experience.
Yes. And he's also then accentuating all the other ways. He's putting quotes around it. He's claiming it's the kind of thing people want to publish immediately. If they want to share with each other, it needs to have all this publicness. Why? Because the publicness, reproducible, verifiable are the criteria of truth in this whole worldview. So the purely personal, the thing that only happened to you once, you've never shared with anyone, that can't be true. But if it's on Snapchat, then it's true.
Yeah. Yeah.
Josh?
Yeah.
Okay. Thanks,
that
Ben.
notion of lived experience isn't the case for Husserl. So I'm wondering whether on the one hand, maybe perhaps Heidegger's use of lived experience in this book is not meant for Husserl, or on the other hand, since he still critiques Husserl, for, as I said before, Husserl's notion of subjectivity as harboring presuppositions within it, maybe there are different levels to this critique of lived experience. The reason I'm saying that Husserl didn't abide by the notion of lived experience as you describe it, is that
No, I agree. Yeah, Husserl clearly cares about truth. He clearly cares about truth. This whole area. Most of Heidegger's critiques of Husserl are that he was too much on the scientific pole of these things, and he was trying to have all of these phenomenological stuff only be, how to put it, useful glasses for the positivist in order to be able to see how he sees, something like that. But with a still fundamentally scientific attitude toward the world. And from Heidegger's point of view, Husserl should have learned from phenomenology to be way more expansive about what counts as truth. And even in Being in Time, he was trying to show him, all the practical and mood-like characters of the life world, not just the ones about, the experienceables that would matter to even to a experimentalist or positivist, right? Which is where Husserl had tended to confine himself, right? Earlier, at least. I mean, by the late 30s, Husserl was expanding that a bit. But anyway, the Husserl connection is interesting. But Isabel?
I was away for a little bit, so let me know if I am repeating. Did you already go through the 3 laws of machination on page 100, on page 98? The reason I'm bringing this up is for 2 reasons. First, it goes into lived experience, and it also shows that machination, like being, conceals itself. So the first law of machination is the more it unfolds, the more it conceals itself as such. The second law, the more it conceals itself, the more it presses toward lived experience. Third law, the more lived experience is accepted as truth and actuality, the more knowledge of machination is hopeless. So beings are unquestioned. We don't question anything. There is no need to question because we know. So 2 things. What about this concealment of machination and the relationship with lived experience? And just a very personal thing, Jason, that my 2 loves are Dante and Heidegger. Do you know that in the center of hell, where Dante finally meets Satan, do you know what Satan is? He is a machine that just flaps its wings, a mechanical machine. He's lost every inch of humanity or angelic humanity, whatever he was. Okay, thank you.
Yeah, so we did talk a lot about the lived experience connection. We didn't talk so much about the machinations concealing itself, but we, I guess the closest we got to that was the when we were just talking about the machination worldview in general, and the disappearing of any truth outside of the calculable. We did talk about the lived experience stuff quite a bit. I don't know if we got through all the laws in terms of the meaning of machination as the lifeless but active. The closest he gets to that here is where he says that it is what frees itself for its own fettering as a part of machination. But in the German rather than the English, a lot more of the accent of machination is on the power aspect rather than the lifeless aspect, right? It's not machine as opposed to alive. It's more like mock oriented as opposed to truth oriented, if that makes sense. It's the accents on the power, if you get me. We're almost at time, but I wanted to at least quickly touch upon the gigantic, and the gigantic as the empty. Did anyone have thoughts or reflections on this? The claim is that there's a fascination with the gigantic that is an avoiding of an emptiness. What's the point? In the absence of anything like meaning, purpose, or true proportion, meaningful proportion, you just substitute something which overwhelms the human scale, overwhelms the human sensibility, seems to dwarf man. And that substitutes for meaning because it, in a sense, he doesn't want to say it this way, but it comes across as sublime. It comes across as more than human. But what is actually being, put it this way, extolled there is something like the organized system that belittles the human. Sorry, Snail has got okay. Just disruptor. Sorry. Anyway, did anyone have thoughts on the gigantic? No one has thoughts on the gigantic. They're too distracted by the disruption.
When
Go
go
ahead,
ahead.
Josh. I was just going to say
Oh.
I wasn't quite sure what to make of it, but what you just said there, Jason, helped me get a little bit of a handle on it.
Go ahead, Josh.
I was just going to say, whenever I, read Heidegger describing the gigantic, I think of, if you remember Carl Sagan, his expression that everybody sort of associated with him is that he talked about billions and billions. And what did he mean by that? Why was that so exciting to him, right? I mean, it was a quality, right? Even though billions of billions is a number, it's a numeric quantity, but there's a qualitative sense that he's trying to convey by talking about the sense of the enormity, right? And I think that sort of kind of illustrates some aspect of the gigantic, what this gigantic signifies for Heidegger, which is this. It's a kind of a worshiping of number for the sake of for the sake of a kind of a self-satisfied schematics, it seems to me, right? I mean,
right. I mean, the way
Go
Heidegger tries to put it is that the gigantic is the incalculable in its essence, but expressed as a calculation, right? So it's as though you're saying this thing is so big you cannot possibly measure it, and I'm going to tell you that by telling you its exact measurements.
That's right.
Right.
Yeah.
So the billions and billions, with the two of them and the S is meant to be indeterminately large. But the last thing you're actually saying is indeterminately large. If you said indeterminately large, then you would be saying something, one, not as dramatic, but you also would be actually denying that you can calculate it. When you say billions and billions, you're pretending that you can calculate what you can't calculate. And pretending you can calculate what you can't calculate has the power fantasy aspect of projecting an ability to calculate over things in an attempt to tame them. That's the claim.
Yeah, right. So it's you're capturing an infinity, right? The infinity is being bounded by something
which means that the actual underlying thought is this limitless thing is tameable. Nothing is actually untamably unlimited, right? It's a claim of systematic representation such that nothing can fall outside of it. Nothing can exceed its grasp, but you show that nothing can exceed its grasp by gesturing to something that seems to exceed all grasp, but that you measure. Dan?
So it's a false enchantment. I'm sorry.
Dan?
Yeah, I think I will go against Heidegger here, and especially what's happening these days, like we have this with big data and with this ChatGPT stuff. Like we see that's the gigantic taking over the science, actually, in my opinion, and it's no longer science like as we understand it. Models and representation is taken down by this kind of, like we are told, I don't know, billion parameters, and it's no longer any representation there, and they are almost perfect, and it's the gigantic again taking over the science.
So I partly agree with you in the sense that they're not modeled, they're not representational, they're only representational to themselves, not to us, right? But we know that they are making representational models inside. We have no idea how. That is in the particulars. We know in the generals. But does that make them perfect? Not remotely, but sure. I mean, as an engineering thing, you know, the meme is just stack layers. So there is definitely a sense in which some of these things can have, you know, qualitative differences. They get quantity. Why is Heidegger feeling so gigantic here? He's just saying the rise of the fascination with the gigantic is one of these signs of people being infatuated by representation and calculation as a means of taming the infinite and the unknown, which are themselves a sign of disquiet before the infinite and the unknown, right? The technological or scientific or calculable or positivistic worldview doesn't really have a place for mystery in it, but it knows the real world has mystery in it, so it has to have a fake place for mystery that it can seem to tame. That's the claim. All right. This was almost afterthought here. I see there's like 14 different chats here, but I assume there's other people talking.
Also, just a minute,
Please.
Jason, but also wasn't there the gigantic, incalculable, isn't that also, doesn't the quantitative become quality? That's a shift that happens. It becomes a qualitative thing, not only a quantitative thing. Or did I misread that?
Sure, he does talk about this, but the point of this, I mean, this is the famous Stalin quote that quantity has a quality all its own, right? But the particular quality that he says the gigantic is aiming at specifically is it's a tamed version of the unknowable or tamed version of the infinite, right? That's the particular qual that it is trying to grasp or capture. He even says that that's why it doesn't know overabundance. Overabundance is a result of adequate possession, right? And there's no notion of the adequate in the gigantic, right? So there can't be more than enough. A gigantic thing is never more than enough because there's no enough. Anyway, this was great. To remind everybody, next time is going to be March the 17th, just section 3 on the interplay, which is going to take us into a lot of the stuff on the idea of metaphysics as a single discursive formation or a single formation underlying, you know, Western history, and do pay attention to how much the thing that the interplay is with as the new beginning is the actual beginning, and how much of it is just where it ended up. Always one of the more contentious points. But okay, that's for next time, the interplay. And thanks everyone for coming. Hope this was useful.
Thanks, guys.
Thanks.
Okay.
Great.
Bye.
Bye-bye.